He laughed when his ex-wife showed up in the will, until the lawyer revealed a terrifying detail. The sun-drenched skyline of Long Beach, California shimmered like a mirage in the late afternoon heat. From the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, Grayson Tanner surveyed his kingdom with the cold, calculating gaze of a man accustomed to bending the world to his will. The port of Long Beach sprawled before him, a maze of cranes and containers that spoke of commerce, power, and the ruthless efficiency that had become his trademark. Grayson's fingers drummed an impatient rhythm on the polished mahogany of his desk. At 45, he cut an imposing figure, salt and pepper hair expertly styled, his tailored Tom Ford suit a testament to the wealth he'd amassed. Every inch of him exuded the confidence of a man who had clawed his way to the top and intended to stay there. "Mr. Tanner?" His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Your 4 p.m. is here." A thin smile curved Grayson's lips. "Send him in, Melissa." The door opened, admitting a nervous-looking man in his 30s. Grayson didn't bother to stand, instead gesturing to the chair across from him with a lazy flick of his wrist. "Mr. Chen." Grayson's voice was smooth as silk, but there was an undercurrent of steel beneath the charm. "I trust you have good news for me?" David Chen swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. "Mr. Tanner, we've run into some complications with the zoning board. They're pushing back on the environmental impact." "Complications?" Grayson interrupted, his tone sharpening. "I don't pay you for complications, David. I pay you for results. Sir, if we could just have a little more time." "Time?" Grayson stood now, his 6.2 frame looming over the desk. "Time is money, and money is something I have in abundance. What I don't have is patience for incompetence." Chen's face paled. "Mr. Tanner, please, you have 48 hours. Grayson cut him off again. 48 hours to make this zoning issue disappear, or I'll find someone who can. Do I make myself clear?" Yes, sir," Chen stammered, rising on shaky legs. "Good." Grayson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Don't let me detain you any longer." As the door closed behind Chen's retreating form, Grayson allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. This was where he thrived, in the pressure cooker of high-stakes business, where fortunes were made and broken on the strength of a handshake or the weakness of a man's resolve. The intercom buzzed again. "Mr. Tanner, your wife is on line 1. Grayson's expression softened fractionally. "Put her through, Melissa." "Darling," Victoria's voice purred through the speaker, "don't forget we have the charity gala tonight at the Aquarium of the Pacific. The car will pick us up at 7. "Of course," Grayson replied, his tone warming. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." "Perfect. Oh, and Grayson, wear the Patek Philippe I got you for Christmas. It'll go wonderfully with my new Versace." "As you wish," he chuckled. "See you at home, love." As he hung up, Grayson's gaze drifted to the framed photos on his desk. Victoria dominated the collection. Victoria at the Cannes Film Festival, radiant in a backless gown. Victoria on their yacht off the coast of Saint-Tropez. Victoria at their wedding 2 years ago, her smile dazzling and triumphant. But there, half hidden behind a more recent photo, was an older picture that seemed out of place among the glossy celebrations of wealth and status. Grayson reached for it, his fingers hesitating for just a moment before pulling it into view. The photo showed a younger version of himself, his arm around a woman with warm brown eyes and a gentle smile. Catherine, his first wife, the woman he'd left behind on his climb to the top. For a brief moment, something that might have been regret flickered across Grayson's face, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by the mask of cool indifference he'd perfected over the years. He slid the photo back into its hiding place, pushing away the unwelcome intrusion of the past. Catherine was ancient history, a stepping stone he'd left far behind. He had everything he'd ever wanted now: wealth, power, a trophy wife who understood the game as well as he did. As if to reinforce this thought, Grayson strode to the window, taking in the view of his empire once more. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink that reflected off the glass and steel of the city he'd conquered. His phone buzzed, and he glanced down to see a text from his broker. Tanner shipping stock up 3% today, projected to rise further on Q3 earnings. Grayson allowed himself a satisfied smirk. This was his world now, a world of numbers and deals, of profits and losses. A world where sentiment was a liability and the past was best left buried. As night fell over Long Beach, Grayson Tanner prepared to leave his office, secure in the knowledge that he was at the pinnacle of his power. Little did he know that fate was about to deal him a hand that would shake the very foundations of the empire he'd built. Across town, in a modest apartment overlooking the less glamorous side of Long Beach, Catherine Humphrey sat at her small kitchen table, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee. The years had been less kind to her than to Grayson. Lines of worry etched her once smooth forehead, and her clothes spoke of practicality rather than luxury. She stared at the envelope in front of her, its crisp white paper emblazoned with the logo of a prestigious law firm. With trembling fingers, she opened it for what must have been the 100th time, rereading the words that had turned her world upside down. Dear Ms. Humphrey, we regret to inform you of the passing of Mr. Sebastian Callahan. As per his last will and testament, your presence is requested at the reading of the will on... Catherine's mind reeled. Sebastian Callahan, a name she hadn't heard in years, a man she'd never met. And yet, here was this letter, summoning her to the reading of his will. It made no sense. She glanced at the clock. In less than 24 hours, she would be sitting in that law office, surrounded by the kind of wealth and power she'd left behind when Grayson had discarded her. The thought made her stomach churn. With a sigh, Catherine rose and moved to the window. The lights of Long Beach twinkled in the distance, a far cry from the opulent view she knew Grayson enjoyed from his penthouse. For a moment, she allowed herself to remember the life she'd once had, the parties, the vacations, the sense of security she'd foolishly believed was unshakable. But that was before Grayson had revealed his true nature, before he'd traded her in for a younger model and left her with nothing but broken dreams and a heart full of bitterness. Catherine's reflection stared back at her from the window, and she straightened her shoulders. Whatever this will reading was about, she would face it with dignity. She'd rebuilt her life once. She could handle whatever tomorrow might bring. Little did Catherine know that across the city, in his luxurious Belmont Shore mansion, Grayson Tanner was receiving an identical summons. The charity gala at the Aquarium of the Pacific was in full swing. The Great Hall, usually home to fascinating marine exhibits, had been transformed into a glittering wonderland of champagne flutes and designer gowns. Grayson moved through the crowd with the easy confidence of a shark in familiar waters, Victoria on his arm like the perfect accessory. "Darling," Victoria murmured, her lips barely moving as she maintained her camera-ready smile. "The Hendersons are here. Why don't you go charm them while I mingle with the board members?" Grayson nodded, appreciating not for the first time how well Victoria understood the game. This wasn't just a charity event. It was a battlefield where alliances were forged, deals were struck, and reputations were made or broken. As he made his way towards the Hendersons, Grayson felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. He excused himself smoothly and stepped away to check the message. The text was from an unknown number. "Mr. Tanner, this is James Woodward from Woodward, Price & Associates. I apologize for the late notice, but it is imperative that you attend a meeting at our offices tomorrow at 2 p.m. regarding the estate of the late Sebastian Callahan. Your presence is required for the reading of Mr. Callahan's will." Grayson frowned, his mind racing. Sebastian Callahan, the reclusive billionaire who'd been a silent partner in several of Grayson's early ventures. They hadn't spoken in years, and as far as Grayson knew, Callahan had no heirs. A slow smile spread across Grayson's face as the implications sank in. Callahan had been worth billions, and if Grayson was being called to the will reading, he quickly composed a reply, confirming his attendance, then rejoined the party with renewed vigor. The night suddenly held the promise of even greater things to come. As the gala wound down in the early hours of the morning, Grayson and Victoria made their way to their waiting limousine. Victoria kicked off her Louboutins with a sigh of relief as they settled into the plush leather seats. "Successful night, I'd say," she purred, running a hand along Grayson's thigh. "I saw you chatting with Senator Williams. Anything interesting?" Grayson smirked, pulling her closer. "Oh, just laying the groundwork for our next big move, but that's not the most interesting news of the evening." Victoria raised a perfectly groomed eyebrow. "Oh? Do tell." "I've been summoned to a will reading tomorrow. Sebastian Callahan's will reading." Victoria's eyes widened. "Callahan, the billionaire recluse? Darling, this could be huge." Grayson nodded, his eyes glinting with anticipation. "Indeed it could. Callahan had no family, no heirs. And given our history, you think he left it all to you?" Victoria breathed, her excitement palpable. "It's a distinct possibility. Grayson replied, allowing himself a moment of unbridled optimism. If that's the case, we're not just talking about millions, Victoria. We're talking billions. Enough to take Tanner Shipping Global to buy out our competitors to rule the world, Victoria finished, her smile predatory. Grayson laughed, raising his glass of champagne in a toast. To ruling the world, then. And to Sebastian Callahan. May he rest in peace and may his fortune rest with us. As the limousine glided through the quiet streets of Long Beach, Grayson Tanner felt the intoxicating rush of impending victory. He'd already conquered this city. With Callahan's billions, the world would be his oyster. In that moment, flying high on champagne and the prospect of unimaginable wealth, Grayson couldn't have known that fate was about to deal him a hand that would bring his carefully constructed world crashing down around him. The pieces were set, the players in motion. In less than 24 hours in a nondescript law office, the lives of Grayson Tanner and Catherine Humphrey would collide once more, with consequences neither of them could have foreseen. As dawn broke over Long Beach, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, two very different alarms sounded in two very different parts of the city. In his Belmont Shore mansion, Grayson Tanner awoke to the gentle chimes of his smartphone, stretching languidly in sheets of Egyptian cotton. Beside him, Victoria stirred, her blonde hair splayed across the pillow like a halo. "Morning, darling," she murmured, her voice husky with sleep. "Ready for your big day?" Grayson smiled, already feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with the prospect of a new conquest. More than ready. By this time tomorrow, we could be celebrating the deal of a lifetime. Across town, in her modest apartment, Catherine Humphrey jolted awake to the harsh buzz of her alarm clock. For a moment, disoriented by sleep, she forgot about the summons, about the will reading that loomed ahead. Then reality crashed back, and she felt her stomach clench with a mixture of anxiety and something else, a feeling she couldn't quite name, a sense that today would change everything. As the morning progressed, the two former spouses went about their routines, unaware of the collision course they were on. Grayson's day started with a power breakfast at his favorite beachfront restaurant. Over perfectly poached eggs and freshly squeezed orange juice, he held court with his inner circle, lawyers, financial advisors, and his most trusted executives. "Gentlemen," he began, his tone commanding attention, "today could mark the beginning of a new era for Tanner Shipping. I've been called to the reading of Sebastian Callahan's will." A murmur of excitement rippled through the group. They all knew what this could mean. "If things go as we hope," Grayson continued, "we'll need to move quickly. I want acquisition plans drawn up for our top 3 competitors and start looking into expanding our operations in Asia, Shanghai, Singapore, Hong Kong. We're going to go global in a big way." As his team nodded eagerly, already reaching for their phones and tablets, Grayson felt a surge of pride. This was what he'd built, an empire poised on the brink of worldwide domination. And after today, there would be no limits to what he could achieve. Meanwhile, Catherine spent her morning in quiet preparation. She stood before her closet, surveying the modest selection of clothes with a critical eye. What did one wear to the reading of a stranger's will, especially when that reading might bring her face to face with the man who had once been the center of her world and who had then shattered it so completely? Finally, she settled on a simple black dress, elegant enough to be respectful, but not so flashy as to look like she was trying too hard. As she applied her makeup with trembling hands, Catherine couldn't help but remember the last time she'd seen Grayson. It had been in this very apartment 5 years ago. He'd come to deliver the divorce papers personally, his eyes cold and distant as he'd handed over the documents that would end their marriage. "It's for the best, Catherine," he'd said, his tone matter of fact. "We both know this hasn't been working for a long time." She'd wanted to scream, to rage at him, to demand how he could throw away 15 years of marriage so casually. But in the end, she'd simply signed the papers, her hand shaking so badly she could barely form her signature. "Goodbye, Catherine," Grayson had said as he turned to leave. "I wish you the best." And then he was gone, taking with him not just their shared life, but also the dreams and plans they'd once made together. In the years since, Catherine had rebuilt her life piece by piece, a new job, new friends, a new sense of purpose. But the wound Grayson had left had never fully healed. Now as she put the finishing touches on her makeup, Catherine steeled herself for the possibility of seeing him again. Whatever happened at this will reading, she was determined to face it with dignity and grace. As the appointed hour drew near, Both Grayson and Catherine made their way to the law offices of Woodward, Price & Associates in downtown Long Beach. Grayson arrived first, stepping out of his chauffeured Bentley with the easy confidence of a man used to commanding any room he entered. He straightened his tie, Hermes of course, and strode into the building, nodding curtly to the receptionist as he passed. In the elevator, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. Sebastian Callahan had been more than just a silent partner in Grayson's early ventures. He'd been a mentor of sorts, a reclusive billionaire who'd seen potential in the young, hungry Grayson Tanner. Their partnership had been brief but pivotal, setting Grayson on the path to the success he now enjoyed. And now, it seemed, Callahan's final act would be to catapult Grayson to even greater heights. The thought brought a smile to his lips as the elevator doors opened onto the law firm's opulent reception area. 10 minutes later, Catherine arrived, her heart pounding as she stepped into the same elevator Grayson had used. She clutched her purse tightly, trying to calm her nerves. What was she doing here? What could Sebastian Callahan, a man she'd never met, possibly want with her? As the elevator ascended, Catherine took a deep breath, centering herself. Whatever awaited her in that conference room, she would face it with the strength and resilience she'd cultivated over the past 5 years. The doors opened, and Catherine stepped into a world she'd once been a part of, a world of polished marble, expensive art, and the subtle scent of power and money. For a moment it threatened to overwhelm her, but she squared her shoulders and approached the receptionist. "Catherine Humphrey," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm here for the reading of Sebastian Callahan's will." The receptionist nodded, her professional smile never wavering. "Of course, Miss Humphrey. They're expecting you in conference room A. Right this way, please." As Catherine followed the receptionist down the hallway, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into something much bigger than she could have imagined. The click of her modest heels on the marble floor seemed to echo ominously, counting down the moments until... What? The receptionist opened a heavy wooden door, gesturing for Catherine to enter. "Mr. Woodward will be with you shortly," she said, before disappearing back down the hallway. Catherine stepped into the conference room and froze. Seated at the far end of the long table, looking as confident and commanding as ever, was Grayson Tanner. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Grayson's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed as he took in the sight of his ex-wife. Catherine felt her heart hammering in her chest, a mix of old pain and new anger threatening to overwhelm her. "Catherine," Grayson said, his voice a mixture of shock and something else. Wariness, perhaps. "What are you doing here?" Before Catherine could respond, the door opened again, and a distinguished-looking man in his 60s entered. "Ah, Ms. Humphrey, Mr. Tanner. Thank you both for coming. I'm James Woodward." He gestured for Catherine to take a seat, seemingly oblivious to the tension crackling between the former spouses. "Now that you're both here, we can begin." Grayson's mind raced as he watched Catherine take a seat across from him. What was she doing here? This had to be some kind of mistake. His eyes darted between Catherine and Woodward, searching for answers. "I'm sure you're both wondering why you've been called here today," Woodward began, his tone grave. "As you know, Sebastian Callahan passed away 2 weeks ago. What you don't know is that in his final days he made some significant changes to his will." Grayson leaned forward, his earlier confidence replaced by a growing sense of unease. "What kind of changes?" Woodward cleared his throat. "Mr. Callahan was a very private man, as you know, but it seems he had secrets even his closest associates were unaware of." He turned to Catherine. "Ms. Humphrey, did you ever know your mother to speak of a man named Sebastian?" Catherine blinked, caught off guard by the question. No, I don't think so. My mother passed away when I was young. I don't remember her talking about anyone by that name." Woodward nodded, as if this confirmed something. "Mr. Callahan left a letter to be read at this meeting. I think it will explain everything." He pulled an envelope from a folder and began to read. "To those gathered here today, if you're hearing this, then I've finally run out of time to make things right in person. I've lived a life of secrets and regrets, but none greater than the one I'm about to reveal. Catherine Humphrey is my daughter. 35 years ago, I had a brief but intense relationship with Catherine's mother, Sarah. When she told me she was pregnant, I panicked. I was building my empire, and the idea of a child, of a family, terrified me. So I ran. I told Sarah I wanted nothing to do with her or the baby, and I buried myself in my work. It was the biggest mistake of my life. By the time I realized what I'd thrown away, it was too late. Sarah had passed away, and Catherine was grown. I watched from afar as she built her life, married, divorced. I told myself it was better this way, that she was better off without the complication of a father who'd abandoned her. But in my final days, I've come to see the cowardice of that thinking. So I'm doing now what I should have done years ago. I'm acknowledging my daughter and giving her what should have been hers all along. To Catherine, I know this must come as a shock. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope that in time you might come to understand. Everything I have, my entire fortune, my companies, my properties, it's all yours now. It's a poor substitute for a lifetime of fatherhood, but it's all I have to give. To Grayson, you were like a son to me once. I saw in you the drive and ambition that defined my own youth. But I've watched as that ambition twisted into something harder, colder. I hope that in losing what you thought you'd gain today, you might find a path back to the man I once believed you could be. I'm sorry for the pain and confusion this may cause, but it's time for the truth to come out, and for justice, however delayed, to be served. Goodbye, and good luck to you both. Sebastian Callahan. As Woodward finished reading, a heavy silence fell over the room. Catherine sat frozen, her mind reeling from the revelation. Grayson's face had drained of color, his earlier confidence replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. Woodward cleared his throat. There's more, of course. Legal documents, financial statements, property deeds, but I think perhaps we should take a moment to let this sink in. Catherine found her voice first. This can't be real. There has to be some mistake. I assure you, Miss Humphrey, there is no mistake, Woodward said gently. Mr. Callahan was very thorough. DNA tests confirming your relationship are included in the documentation. Grayson slammed his hand on the table, causing both Catherine and Woodward to jump. This is absurd. Sebastian was my mentor, my partner. He can't. I'm afraid he can, Mr. Tanner, Woodward said, his tone firm. And he has. As of this moment, all of Sebastian Callahan's assets, including his controlling interests in various companies, including, I believe, some of your own ventures, now belong to Ms. Humphrey. The implications of this statement hit Grayson like a physical blow. He turned to Catherine, his eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and desperation. Catherine, you don't know the first thing about running a business empire. This is madness. Catherine met his gaze, a strange calm settling over her. I may not know much about business empires, Grayson, but I do know about betrayal and justice. As the gravity of the situation settled over the room, none of them could have predicted the storm that was about to engulf their lives. The reading of Sebastian Callahan's will was just the beginning, a spark that would ignite a firestorm of revenge, redemption, and unexpected alliances in the glittering world of Long Beach's elite. The tension in the conference room was palpable as James Woodward shuffled through the stack of legal documents before him. Catherine sat rigidly in her chair, her mind still reeling from the revelation that Sebastian Callahan, a man she'd never met, was her father. Across the table, Grayson's face was a mask of barely contained fury, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests of his chair. Now, Woodward began, his tone carefully neutral. There are several other parties named in Mr. Callahan's will who should be joining us shortly. While we wait, perhaps we could go over some of the preliminary details. The door burst open, cutting Woodward off mid-sentence. Victoria Tanner swept into the room, her Louboutins clicking sharply on the polished floor. She faltered for a moment when she saw Catherine, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows arching in surprise. "What is she doing here?" Victoria demanded, turning to Grayson. Her voice dripped with disdain as she added, "Darling, you didn't tell me your ex-wife would be part of this proceeding." Grayson stood, placing a hand on Victoria's arm in a gesture that was both possessive and restraining. "I didn't know," he said through gritted teeth. "It seems there are quite a few surprises today." Catherine watched the exchange with a mixture of fascination and revulsion. She'd never met Victoria in person, but she'd seen enough tabloid photos to recognize the woman who had replaced her in Grayson's life. Seeing them together, Grayson in his impeccable suit, Victoria in a dress that probably cost more than Catherine's monthly rent, brought back a flood of painful memories. As if sensing Catherine's discomfort, Woodward cleared his throat. "Mrs. Tanner, thank you for joining us. We were just about to review some of the details of Mr. Callahan's estate. If you'd like to take a seat, I'll stand, thank you," Victoria said crisply. She remained by Grayson's side, her hand resting possessively on his shoulder. "Please continue." Woodward nodded, then turned back to his documents. "As I was saying, Mr. Callahan's estate is substantial. In addition to his personal fortune, estimated at just over $4 billion, there are numerous real estate holdings, art collections, and of course, his business interests." At the mention of business interests, Grayson leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "What exactly are we talking about here, James? Sebastian was a silent partner in several of my ventures, but surely—" "I'm afraid it's more complicated than that, Mr. Tanner," Woodward interrupted. "Mr. Callahan held controlling interests in a number of companies, including a 51% stake in Tanner Shipping." The color drained from Grayson's face. "That's impossible." "I would have known—" "The purchases were made through a series of shell companies," Woodward explained. "Mr. Callahan was very discreet in his business dealings." As Woodward continued to detail the extent of Callahan's holdings, Catherine found her mind drifting back to the last time she'd seen Grayson before today. It had been at a charity gala, nearly a year after their divorce. The ballroom of the Long Beach Convention Center glittered with crystal chandeliers and the jewels of the city's elite. Catherine stood by the bar, nursing a glass of champagne she couldn't afford, feeling woefully out of place in her rented gown. She hadn't wanted to come, but her new boss had insisted. "It's good for business," he'd said. "You never know who you might meet." What he hadn't mentioned was the possibility of running into her ex-husband. Grayson's laugh cut through the murmur of the crowd, drawing Catherine's attention to the far side of the room. He stood in the center of a group of admiring guests, his arm around a statuesque blonde who could only be Victoria. As if sensing her gaze, Grayson looked up. For a moment, their eyes met across the crowded room. Catherine saw a flicker of something in his expression. Recognition? Regret? But then Victoria said something, and Grayson turned away, the moment lost. Catherine set down her champagne glass and fled the ballroom, tears burning in her eyes. "Miss Humphrey, are you all right?" Woodward's concerned voice snapped Catherine back to the present. She realized everyone was staring at her, Grayson with a mixture of anger and confusion, Victoria with thinly veiled contempt, and Woodward with genuine concern. "I'm fine," Catherine said, forcing a smile. "Please, continue." Woodward nodded, but before he could speak, the door opened again. This time a small group entered, a severe-looking woman in her 50s, a younger man who bore a striking resemblance to Sebastian Callahan, and an elderly gentleman leaning heavily on a cane. "Ah," Woodward said, standing to greet the newcomers. "Allow me to introduce Margaret Callahan, Sebastian's sister, Thomas Callahan, Sebastian's nephew, and Harold Winters, Sebastian's oldest friend and business partner." As the newcomers took their seats, the atmosphere in the room shifted. What had been a tense standoff between Grayson, Catherine, and Victoria now became a complex web of competing interests and barely concealed hostility. Margaret Callahan's eyes narrowed as she took in the scene before her. "James," she said, her voice sharp, "I thought this was to be a private family matter. Why are all these people here?" Woodward cleared his throat. "I assure you, Mrs. Callahan, everyone present has a stake in your brother's estate. If you'll allow me to explain—" "Explain?" Thomas Callahan interrupted, his voice rising. "What's there to explain? Uncle Sebastian promised me that company would be mine when he died. I've been working there for years, preparing to take over. You can't tell me he changed his mind at the last minute." As Thomas's outburst faded, Harold Winters spoke up, his voice quavering with age, but still commanding attention. Now, let's all calm down. I'm sure Sebastian had his reasons for whatever decisions he made. James, why don't you tell us exactly what those decisions were?" Woodward nodded gratefully at Harold. "Thank you, Mr. Winters. As I was explaining earlier, Mr. Callahan made some significant changes to his will in his final days. These changes primarily concern the distribution of his estate and the control of his business interests." He paused, his eyes scanning the room before settling on Catherine. "The majority of Mr. Callahan's estate, including his controlling interests in various companies, has been left to his daughter, Catherine Humphrey." The room erupted into chaos. Margaret Callahan let out a strangled cry of disbelief. Thomas jumped to his feet, his face red with anger. Victoria's grip on Grayson's shoulder tightened painfully. "This is preposterous," Margaret shouted over the din. "Sebastian never had a daughter. This woman is an imposter, a gold digger trying to steal what rightfully belongs to our family." Catherine flinched at the accusation, but before she could defend herself, Harold Winters spoke up again. "Margaret, please, let's hear James out. I'm sure there's an explanation for all of this." Woodward nodded gratefully at the older man. "Indeed there is, Mr. Winters. Mr. Callahan left a detailed letter explaining his relationship with Ms. Humphrey's mother, and his reasons for acknowledging Catherine as his daughter after all these years. We also have DNA test results confirming their relationship." As Woodward spoke, Catherine found herself locking eyes with Grayson. His expression was unreadable, but she could almost see the gears turning in his head, calculating what this meant for him, for his business, for the empire he'd built. For a moment, Catherine was transported back to the early days of their marriage, when Grayson was just starting to make a name for himself in the shipping industry. "Grayson, are you sure about this?" Catherine asked, her voice laced with concern. They were in their small apartment, papers spread out on the dining table that doubled as Grayson's desk. Grayson looked up, his eyes bright with excitement. "Of course I'm sure, Kath. This deal could put Tanner Shipping on the map. We'd be able to expand, take on bigger clients, but the risk," Catherine pressed. "If it doesn't work out, we could lose everything." Grayson's expression softened. He stood and pulled Catherine into his arms. "I know it's scary," he said softly, "but sometimes you have to take risks to get ahead. Trust me, this is going to work out, and when it does, I promise you, we'll have everything we ever dreamed of." Catherine nodded, letting herself believe in the dream Grayson was painting. She couldn't have known then how that drive, that willingness to take risks, would eventually consume him. The sound of Thomas Callahan's voice, rising in anger, brought Catherine back to the present. "This is ridiculous," he was shouting. "I don't care what some letter says, there's no way Uncle Sebastian would leave everything to a stranger." "I assure you, Mr. Callahan, your uncle's wishes were quite clear," Woodward said, his tone firm. "While you and Mrs. Callahan are provided for in the will, the bulk of the estate, including control of Callahan Industries, goes to Ms. Humphrey." Grayson, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke up. "And what about Tanner Shipping? You mentioned Sebastian held a controlling interest." Woodward nodded, his expression grave. "Yes, Mr. Tanner. As I mentioned earlier, Mr. Callahan's 51% stake in Tanner Shipping now belongs to Ms. Humphrey." The implications of this statement hung heavy in the air. Catherine felt the weight of everyone's stares, a mixture of disbelief, anger, and in Grayson's case, a calculating intensity that made her shiver. Victoria was the first to break the silence. "This is absurd," she hissed, her perfectly manicured nails digging into Grayson's shoulder. "Grayson, darling, surely there's something we can do. This woman can't just waltz in here and take everything you've worked for." Grayson patted Victoria's hand absently, his mind clearly racing. "James," he said, his voice deceptively calm, "surely there are legal challenges we can make. DNA test or not, this all seems highly irregular." Woodward sighed. "You're welcome to pursue legal action, Mr. Tanner, but I can assure you that Mr. Callahan's legal team was very thorough. The will is ironclad." As the reality of the situation began to sink in, the room once again descended into chaos. Margaret and Thomas Callahan huddled together, whispering furiously. Victoria paced the length of the room, her phone in hand, presumably calling their lawyers. Harold Winters sat quietly, a thoughtful expression on his weathered face. And in the center of it all sat Catherine, still trying to process the monumental changes that had just been thrust upon her. She was now apparently a billionaire, the majority shareholder in her ex-husband's company, the heir to an empire she knew nothing about. As the noise in the room reached a fever pitch, Catherine found her gaze drawn once again to Grayson. He was staring at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. In that moment, she saw something in his eyes that she hadn't seen in years. A spark of the man she'd fallen in love with, the man who could look at an impossible situation and see opportunity. But then, Victoria was at his side again, whispering urgently in his ear, and the moment was gone. Grayson's expression hardened, the calculating businessman once again firmly in control. Woodward raised his voice, trying to be heard over the commotion. "Please, everyone, if we could just calm down." But his words were drowned out as the door burst open once again. A young woman rushed in, her face flushed with exertion. "I'm so sorry I'm late," she gasped. "Traffic was a nightmare, and then I couldn't find parking." She broke off as she took in the tense scene before her. Did I miss something?" Woodward sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Ms. Chen, thank you for joining us. Everyone, this is Lily Chen, Mr. Callahan's personal assistant for the past 5 years. Lily's eyes widened as she scanned the room, taking in the angry faces and tense postures. "Oh boy," she muttered. "He really did it, didn't he?" This quiet comment drew everyone's attention. Margaret Callahan rounded on the young woman, her eyes flashing. "What do you mean, he really did it? Did you know about this farce?" Lily held up her hands defensively. "I didn't know the details, I swear. Mr. Callahan just told me that he was making some big changes to his will, that he was finally going to make things right. He seemed, I don't know, at peace with it all." As Lily spoke, Catherine found herself studying the young woman closely. There was something in her demeanor, a mix of nervousness and resolve that suggested she knew more than she was letting on. Grayson seemed to pick up on this too. He stepped forward, his voice smooth as silk, but with an undercurrent of steel. "Ms. Chen, was it? I'm sure you must have some insight into Sebastian's state of mind in his final days. Perhaps you could shed some light on why he would make such a drastic decision." Lily swallowed hard, her eyes darting between Grayson and Catherine. I'm not sure I should—" "Oh, for heaven's sake," Margaret Callahan interrupted. "The girl obviously knows something. Spit it out, young lady." Lily took a deep breath, then squared her shoulders. "Mr. Callahan talked a lot about regrets in his last few weeks. He kept looking at this old photo he had of a woman holding a baby. He said he'd made a terrible mistake, and that he needed to make it right before it was too late." As Lily spoke, Catherine felt a lump forming in her throat. The photo the young woman described, could it have been of her and her mother? Woodward cleared his throat. "Thank you, Ms. Chen. That corroborates much of what Mr. Callahan wrote in his letter. Now, if we could please return to the matter at hand." But Grayson wasn't finished. He turned to Catherine, his eyes boring into hers. "Did you know about any of this?" he demanded. "How long have you been planning this little coup?" Catherine met his gaze steadily, anger flaring within her. "I had no idea, Grayson. Unlike some people, I don't spend my time plotting and scheming." Victoria let out a derisive laugh. "Oh, please, you expect us to believe that you just happened to show up here today, completely unaware that you were about to inherit billions? How convenient." Catherine stood, her patience finally snapping. "Believe what you want. I came here because I received a letter just like the rest of you. I had no idea who Sebastian Callahan was, let alone that he was my father. And I certainly didn't expect to find myself in the middle of whatever this is." She turned to Woodward, her voice shaking slightly. "Mr. Woodward, I appreciate you informing me of my inheritance, but I think I need some time to process all of this. Is there anything else I need to know right now, or can I go?" Woodward nodded sympathetically. "Of course, Ms. Humphrey. There are many details we'll need to go over, but they can wait. I'll have my assistant schedule a private meeting with you to discuss everything in depth." As Catherine gathered her things, preparing to leave, Grayson stepped into her path. For a moment they stood face to face, closer than they had been in years. Catherine could see the storm of emotions in Grayson's eyes. Anger, disbelief, and something else, something that looked almost like fear. "This isn't over, Catherine," Grayson said, his voice low and intense. "You have no idea what you're getting into. The business world, it's not a place for amateurs. You'll be eaten alive." Catherine met his gaze unflinchingly. "Maybe so," she replied, "but I've survived worse. Goodbye, Grayson." With that, she brushed past him and walked out of the conference room, her head held high. As the door closed behind her, she leaned against the wall, her legs suddenly weak. The full weight of what had just happened crashed over her like a wave. She was Sebastian Callahan's daughter. She was a billionaire. She now controlled a business empire, including a majority stake in her ex-husband's company. As the implications of it all swirled in her mind, Catherine straightened up, a newfound determination settling over her. She didn't ask for any of this, but now that it had been thrust upon her, she was determined to face it head-on. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever schemes Grayson might be plotting, she would be ready. Back in the conference room, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Grayson paced the length of the room, his mind racing. This couldn't be happening. Everything he'd built, everything he'd sacrificed for, it was all slipping through his fingers. "Grayson," Victoria hissed, grabbing his arm. "We need to do something. Call the lawyers. Call anyone who can stop this madness." He shook her off, irritated by her panic. "Not now, Victoria. I need to think." As Grayson's mind whirled with possibilities and potential moves, He found himself transported back to a pivotal moment in his career, a decision that had set him on the path to where he was today. 5 years earlier, Grayson sat in his office, staring at the contract before him. It was a deal that would catapult Tanner Shipping into the big leagues, securing contracts with some of the largest corporations in the world. But there was a catch. His phone buzzed. It was Catherine. "Hey, honey. Just wanted to remind you about dinner with my parents tonight. Mom's making your favorite pot roast." Grayson's eyes flicked to the contract, then back to his phone. "Listen, Kath, something's come up at work. I don't think I'll make it tonight." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Again? Grayson, you promised. This is the third time this month you've cancelled on my family." He could hear the disappointment in her voice, but he pushed it aside. "I know, I'm sorry, but this is important. I'll make it up to you, I promise." As he hung up, Grayson turned back to the contract. He knew what he had to do. With a steady hand, he signed his name, sealing a deal that would require him to cut corners, to bend rules, to do whatever it took to meet impossible deadlines. It was the first of many such decisions, each one taking him further from the man Catherine had married and closer to the cutthroat businessman he'd become. "Mr. Tanner." Woodward's voice cut through Grayson's memories. "As I was saying, while Ms. Humphrey now holds the majority stake in Tanner Shipping, there are provisions in place to ensure a smooth transition. You'll retain your position as CEO, at least for the time being." Grayson's head snapped up. "At least for the time being? What exactly does that mean?" Woodward shuffled through his papers. "According to Mr. Callahan's instructions, Ms. Humphrey is to be given full access to all company records and decision-making processes. She'll have the authority to review and, if necessary, overturn any major business decisions." The room erupted into chaos once again. Margaret Callahan was shouting about family legacy. Thomas was threatening legal action, and Victoria was on the phone, her voice rising as she demanded to speak to their lawyer immediately. Amidst the commotion, Harold Winters caught Grayson's eye. The old man beckoned him over, his expression grave. "You're in a tight spot, son," Harold said, his voice low. "But don't do anything rash. Sebastian always spoke highly of you, even in recent years when you two had your differences." Grayson's eyes narrowed. "What are you saying, Harold?" The old man sighed. "I'm saying that Sebastian wouldn't have left things this way if he didn't have a reason. Maybe instead of fighting this, you should try to understand why he did it." Before Grayson could respond, Lily Chen approached them hesitantly. "Mr. Tanner, there's something else you should know. Mr. Callahan left a personal letter for you. He asked me to give it to you after the will reading." She handed Grayson a sealed envelope. He took it, his hand trembling slightly. What final words did Sebastian have for him? Advice? An explanation? Or perhaps one last lesson from the man who had been his mentor? As Grayson stared at the envelope, the noise in the room faded to a dull roar. He was vaguely aware of Woodward trying to restore order, of Victoria tugging at his sleeve, demanding his attention, but all he could focus on was the letter in his hands and the sudden, overwhelming feeling that everything was about to change. In that moment, Grayson Tanner, the man who had always prided himself on being in control, on seeing 10 steps ahead in every situation, felt completely and utterly lost. The carefully constructed world he had built was crumbling around him, and for the first time in years he had no idea what his next move should be. As he slipped the letter into his pocket, Grayson's gaze was drawn to the window. Outside, the sun was setting over Long Beach, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was the same view he'd admired countless times from his office, a view that had always filled him with a sense of power and possibility. Now, as he watched the sun sink below the horizon, Grayson couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching his own empire setting, about to be plunged into a long, uncertain night. "Grayson," Victoria's sharp voice finally cut through his reverie. "Are you even listening to me? We need to leave now. The lawyers are waiting." He turned to her, seeing the panic in her eyes, the way her perfectly manicured nails dug into her designer clutch. For a moment, he saw her clearly, not as his wife, but as another acquisition, another step on his climb to the top. "You go ahead," he said, his voice distant. "I'll meet you there." Victoria's eyes widened in disbelief. "You can't be serious." "Grayson, everything we've worked for is at stake here." "I said go," Grayson snapped, his composure finally cracking. "I'll be there soon. I need a minute." As Victoria stormed out, her heels clicking angrily on the polished floor. Grayson turned back to the window. The last rays of sunlight were fading, the city below coming alive with twinkling lights. Somewhere out there, Catherine was grappling with her new reality just as he was. What was she thinking? What would she do with the power that had been suddenly thrust upon her? And more importantly, what would he do to stop her? As the room gradually emptied, the various players in this unfolding drama departing to lick their wounds and plot their next moves, Grayson remained by the window. His hand drifted to his pocket, feeling the weight of Sebastian's letter. Whatever that letter contained, whatever challenges lay ahead, one thing was certain. The game had changed. And Grayson Tanner, the man who had always played to win, was not about to forfeit without a fight. As night fell over Long Beach, the pieces were set for a battle that would shake the foundations of the city's elite. A battle of wills, of old wounds and new alliances, of revenge and redemption. And at the center of it all, two former lovers turned adversaries, their fates now inextricably intertwined once more. The stage was set. The players were in position. And as Grayson finally turned away from the window, his jaw set with determination, the opening moves of this high-stakes game were already being made. Little did any of them know, the true shocks were yet to come. For in the shadows, unseen and unsuspected, other forces were at work, forces that would soon throw everything into chaos and push Grayson, Catherine, and everyone around them to their very limits. The sun had set on the old order. A new day was dawning in Long Beach, and with it a storm that would leave no one untouched. The Long Beach skyline glittered in the distance as Catherine Humphrey stood on the balcony of her modest apartment, a glass of wine untouched in her hand. The events of the day swirled in her mind like a tempest, refusing to settle into any semblance of order or reason. Just hours ago, she had been Catherine Humphrey, divorcee and middle management accountant. Now she was Catherine Humphrey, billionaire heiress and majority shareholder of a business empire she knew nothing about. The cool night air did little to calm the riot of emotions within her. Shock, disbelief, anger, and a strange, guilty sort of elation battled for dominance. She took a sip of wine, grimacing at the cheap taste. It occurred to her, with a burst of hysterical laughter, that she could probably buy out the entire vineyard now if she wanted to. Inside, her phone buzzed incessantly. Journalists, lawyers, long-lost friends suddenly eager to reconnect, all clamoring for a piece of the woman who had inherited Sebastian Callahan's fortune. Catherine ignored them all, her eyes fixed on the city lights, searching for answers in the urban sprawl. "Who were you, Sebastian Callahan?" she whispered to the night. "And why did you wait so long to acknowledge me?" As if in answer, her gaze fell on an old photo album sitting on her coffee table. With trembling hands, she opened it, flipping through pages of memories until she found what she was looking for. A faded photograph of her mother, young and radiant, holding a baby Catherine in her arms. For the first time, Catherine looked at the photo with new eyes, searching for traces of Sebastian Callahan in her own features. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her jaw, were these gifts from a father she had never known? A wave of anger washed over her. How dare he? How dare Sebastian Callahan swoop in at the last moment, upending her life with a revelation and a fortune? Where was he when her mother struggled to make ends meet? Where was he during the lonely nights of Catherine's childhood, when she wondered why she didn't have a father like the other kids? The wine glass shattered in Catherine's grip, startling her out of her spiraling thoughts. As she cleaned up the mess, hissing at the small cut on her palm, a new resolve began to form. She may not have asked for this inheritance, but now that she had it, she would use it. For what, she wasn't sure yet, but one thing was certain. She would not let Sebastian Callahan's last act define her. She would forge her own path, make her own mark on the world. With a deep breath, Catherine picked up her phone and dialed the number James Woodward had given her. It was time to start getting answers. Across town, in the opulent master bedroom of his Belmont Shore mansion, Grayson Tanner paced like a caged tiger. The plush carpet muffled his footsteps, but nothing could quiet the storm of his thoughts. "This is a nightmare," he muttered, running a hand through his usually immaculate hair. "It has to be a nightmare." Victoria sat at her vanity, methodically removing her makeup. Her movements were precise, controlled, but Grayson could see the tension in the set of her shoulders, the tightness around her eyes. "Darling," she said, her voice deceptively calm, "you need to calm down. Panicking won't solve anything." Grayson whirled on her, his eyes flashing. Calm down, Victoria. Do you not understand what's happening here? Everything I've built, everything we have, it's all at risk. Victoria set down her makeup remover with a sharp click. Of course I understand, Grayson, but falling apart won't help. We need a plan. A plan, Grayson echoed, laughing bitterly. What kind of plan could possibly fix this? My mentor, the man I trusted, has just handed control of my company to my ex-wife. My ex-wife, Victoria. As the words left his mouth, the full weight of the situation seemed to hit Grayson anew. He sank onto the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. God, Catherine must be loving this. All these years, and now she holds my future in her hands. Victoria moved to sit beside him, her hand resting on his back. Then we'll have to make sure she doesn't get to keep that power for long. Catherine may have inherited Sebastian's shares, but she knows nothing about running a business. We can use that to our advantage. Grayson looked up, a glimmer of his old calculating self returning to his eyes. You're right. Catherine's out of her depth. She'll make mistakes. And when she does, we'll be there to capitalize on them, Victoria finished, a predatory smile curving her lips. For a moment they sat in silence, the beginnings of a plan forming between them. Then Grayson remembered the letter in his pocket, Sebastian's final words to him. With shaking hands, he pulled out the envelope. What's that? Victoria asked, eyeing the letter suspiciously. Something Sebastian left for me, Grayson replied. His assistant gave it to me after the will reading. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Well, aren't you going to open it? Grayson stared at the envelope, a strange reluctance holding him back. What if this letter contained more surprises? More ways for Sebastian to upend his life from beyond the grave? Taking a deep breath, he tore open the envelope and began to read. Grayson, if you're reading this, then the will has been read, and you know about Catherine. I can only imagine the anger and betrayal you must be feeling right now. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope that in time you might come to understand. You were like a son to me, Grayson. I saw in you the drive, the ambition that defined my own youth, but I've watched over the years as that ambition twisted into something harder, colder. You've achieved great things, but at what cost? I know you're probably wondering why I've done this, why I've handed control of your company to Catherine. The truth is, it's not just about making amends with my daughter. It's about you too. You're at a crossroads, Grayson. The path you're on leads to a lonely place, trust me, I know. I've walked it, but it's not too late to change course. Catherine has a good heart, a strength that reminds me so much of her mother. Working with her, truly collaborating instead of competing, could open up possibilities you've never imagined. I'm not asking you to give up your ambitions. I'm challenging you to expand them, to see beyond the bottom line and quarterly reports, to build something truly meaningful. The choice, as always, is yours, but remember this, true legacy isn't measured in dollars and cents, but in the lives we touch and the changes we make in the world. I hope you'll make me proud one last time, Sebastian. As Grayson finished reading, he felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet once again. He had expected recriminations, perhaps even a final twist of the knife, but this plea for redemption, this challenge to be better, it was so far from anything he had anticipated that he didn't know how to process it. Well? Victoria's impatient voice cut through his thoughts. What does it say? Grayson folded the letter carefully, tucking it back into his pocket. Nothing important, he lied smoothly. Just some sentimental ramblings. Victoria studied him for a moment, clearly not entirely convinced. But before she could press further, Grayson's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The name on the screen made his blood run cold. Marcus Bianchi, his biggest investor. I have to take this, Grayson said, standing abruptly. He strode out onto the balcony, taking a deep breath before answering. Marcus, how are you? Cut the crap, Tanner. Bianchi's gruff voice came through the speaker. I just got off the phone with my lawyers. Is it true? Has control of Tanner Shipping really been handed over to your ex-wife? Grayson winced. News traveled fast in their circles, but this was quicker than he'd anticipated. It's complicated, Marcus. There's been a change in ownership, yes, but I'm still CEO. Operations will continue as normal. Normal? Bianchi interrupted with a harsh laugh. There's nothing normal about this situation, Grayson. I invested in your company because I believed in your vision, your leadership. Now I find out that some woman I've never met is calling the shots. This isn't what I signed up for. Catherine won't be making any drastic changes, Grayson assured him, trying to keep the desperation out of his voice. I'll make sure of it. Our plans for expansion in Asia are still on track. Save it! Bianchi cut him off again. I'm calling an emergency meeting of the board tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. You'd better have a damn good explanation for all of this, Tanner, and a plan for how you're going to fix it. The line went dead before Grayson could respond. He stood there for a long moment, staring out at the city lights, Sebastian's letter weighing heavy in his pocket. Inside, he could hear Victoria on the phone, her voice rising and falling as she no doubt worked her own contacts, trying to contain the damage. But Grayson knew it was already too late. By morning, every major player in the business world would know about Catherine's inheritance. The empire he'd spent years building was suddenly on shaky ground. As the gravity of the situation settled over him, Grayson felt a cold determination replace his earlier panic. Sebastian's words echoed in his mind, challenging him to be better, to see beyond the bottom line. But all Grayson could see was a threat to everything he'd worked for. No, he decided. He wouldn't roll over and let Catherine destroy what he'd built. He'd fight, with every trick, every connection, every ounce of cunning he possessed. And when the dust settled, he'd be back on top, stronger than ever. With renewed purpose, Grayson strode back into the bedroom. "Victoria," he called, "cancel whatever plans you had for tomorrow. We've got work to do." As the first light of dawn broke over Long Beach, the stage was set for a battle that would shake the foundations of the city's business world. And at the center of it all, two former lovers turned adversaries, their fates now inextricably intertwined. Meanwhile, in a small cafe near the beach, Catherine sat across from James Woodward, her head spinning with the information he'd just shared. "So let me get this straight," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Not only did Sebastian Callahan leave me his personal fortune, but he also left me controlling interests in multiple companies, including Grayson's." Woodward nodded, his expression sympathetic. "That's correct, Ms. Humphrey. You now hold a 51% stake in Tanner Shipping, as well as significant interests in several other major corporations." Catherine leaned back in her chair, feeling suddenly lightheaded. But why? Why would he do this? And why now, after all these years? Woodward pulled out a thick file from his briefcase. "Mr. Callahan left extensive documentation explaining his decisions. It seems he had been keeping tabs on you for years, watching from afar as you built your life. He expressed deep regret for not being part of your life earlier." As Woodward continued to explain the intricacies of her inheritance, Catherine's mind drifted to her mother. Sarah Humphrey had raised Catherine alone, working 2 jobs to make ends meet. She had never spoken ill of Catherine's father, only saying that he wasn't ready for a family when Catherine was born. Now, learning of Sebastian Callahan's wealth and influence, Catherine felt a surge of anger on her mother's behalf. How different might their lives have been if Sebastian had taken responsibility from the beginning? "Ms. Humphrey," Woodward's voice brought her back to the present. "There's something else you should know. Mr. Callahan left a personal letter for you as well." He handed her an envelope, similar to the one Grayson had received. With trembling hands, Catherine opened it and began to read. "My dearest Catherine, by the time you read this, you will have learned the truth about your parentage. I can only imagine the shock and confusion you must be feeling. I hope that in time you might find it in your heart to forgive me for my absence in your life. I met your mother, Sarah, when we were both young and full of dreams. She was the most beautiful, kind-hearted woman I had ever known. But I was ambitious, focused solely on building my empire. When Sarah told me she was pregnant, I panicked. I convinced myself that a family would hold me back, that I wasn't ready for that responsibility. It was the biggest mistake of my life. By the time I realized what I had thrown away, it was too late. Sarah had passed away, and you were grown. I told myself it was better to stay away, that you were better off without the complication of a father who had abandoned you. But in my final days, I've come to see the cowardice of that thinking. I can never make up for the years I've lost, for not being there to see you grow into the remarkable woman you've become. But I hope that with this inheritance, I can give you the opportunities and security I should have provided all along. You're probably wondering about Grayson Tanner and why I've given you control of his company. The truth is, Grayson reminds me a lot of myself at his age. Brilliant, ambitious, but in danger of losing sight of what truly matters in life. I've watched as he's made many of the same mistakes I did, prioritizing success and power over genuine human connection. By bringing you into his world, I hope to challenge him, to make him see that there's more to life than the next big deal. But more importantly, I believe that you, Catherine, with your compassion and integrity, can bring a much-needed perspective to the business world. You have the power now to make real positive changes in the lives of thousands of employees and their families. I know this is a lot to take in, and you may feel unprepared for the responsibility I've placed on your shoulders. But I have faith in you, Catherine. You have a strength and wisdom that goes beyond business acumen. Trust in that, and you will do great things. I can never undo the pain my absence has caused you, but I hope that in some small way, this inheritance can be a force for good in your life and in the world. With all my love and deepest regrets, your father, Sebastian Callahan. As Catherine finished reading, she felt tears streaming down her face. The letter had cracked open a well of emotions she hadn't even known existed: grief for the father she never knew, anger at the years lost, and a strange, bittersweet gratitude for this final act of acknowledgement. Woodward waited patiently as Catherine composed herself. When she looked up, there was a new determination in her eyes. "Mr. Woodward," she said, her voice steady, "I think it's time I learned exactly what I've inherited, and more importantly, what I can do with it." As the morning sun climbed higher over Long Beach, Catherine Humphrey began to step into her new role, unaware of the storm that was brewing in the boardrooms and back alleys of the business world. Across town, Grayson Tanner strode into the Tanner Shipping headquarters, his game face firmly in place. The lobby fell silent as he passed, employees exchanging worried glances. News of the change in ownership had spread like wildfire, and the atmosphere was thick with tension and uncertainty. As he rode the elevator to the top floor, Grayson's mind raced with strategies and contingencies. The board meeting was in less than an hour, and he knew it would be the fight of his professional life. The elevator doors opened, and Grayson stepped out to find his executive assistant, Melissa, waiting for him with a harried expression. "Mr. Tanner," she said, falling into step beside him, "the board members are already gathering in the conference room. Mr. Bianchi arrived early, and he's not happy." Grayson nodded curtly. "Thank you, Melissa. Hold all my calls unless it's an absolute emergency. And get me a coffee, would you? I have a feeling I'm going to need it." As Melissa hurried off, Grayson paused outside the conference room door. He could hear the murmur of voices inside, the undercurrent of tension palpable even through the thick wood. Taking a deep breath, he straightened his tie and pushed open the door. The room fell silent as he entered. Around the long table sat the men and women who had helped him build Tanner Shipping into the powerhouse it was today. Now, their faces ranged from concern to outright hostility. At the far end of the table, Marcus Bianchi sat with his arms crossed, his expression thunderous. "Well, well," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "So nice of you to join us, Tanner. Care to explain how you've managed to lose control of your own company overnight?" Grayson moved to the head of the table, his posture radiating confidence he didn't entirely feel. "Good morning, everyone. I understand you all have concerns, and I'm here to address them. But first, let me be clear, Tanner Shipping is not lost, far from it." He took his seat, surveying the faces around the table. Some looked skeptical, others worried, but all were waiting for answers. "As you've no doubt heard, there has been a change in the majority shareholding of our company," Grayson began, his voice steady. "Sebastian Callahan, a long-time silent partner in our ventures, has passed away. In his will, he left his shares to his previously unknown daughter, Catherine Humphrey." A murmur rippled through the room. Grayson held up a hand for silence. "I know this comes as a shock. Believe me, no one was more surprised than I was. But I want to assure you all that this change in ownership does not change our vision, our goals, or our commitment to excellence." Marcus Bianchi leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Cut the PR, speak, Tanner. We all know who Catherine Humphrey is. She's your ex-wife, for God's sake. How can you sit there and tell us this won't affect operations?" Grayson felt a flicker of anger, but he kept his expression neutral. "Catherine and I have a complicated history, yes. But this is business, not personal. She may hold the majority of shares, but I remain CEO of this company. Our day-to-day operations will continue as normal." "Normal?" Another board member, Janet Chen, spoke up. "Grayson, our stock has already taken a hit. The market doesn't like uncertainty, and right now we're one big question mark." Grayson nodded, acknowledging her point. "You're right, Janet, which is why we need to present a united front. Catherine has no experience in our industry. She'll need guidance, support, that's where we come in. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. Think of this as an opportunity. With Catherine's inherited assets, we have access to resources we've only dreamed of before. Our plans for expansion in Asia, we can accelerate them. That merger we've been considering, it's now within reach. As Grayson continued to outline his vision, he could see the mood in the room starting to shift. The initial panic was being replaced by cautious optimism. Even Marcus Bianchi's scowl had softened slightly. But just as Grayson thought he might be regaining control of the situation, the conference room door burst open. All heads turned to see Melissa, Grayson's assistant, looking flustered. "I'm so sorry to interrupt, Mr. Tanner, but she's here." "Who's here?" Grayson asked, though a sinking feeling in his gut told him he already knew the answer. "Ms. Humphrey," Melissa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Catherine Humphrey. She's in the lobby demanding to speak with you and the board immediately." The room erupted into chaos. Board members started talking over each other, some demanding Catherine be sent away, others insisting they hear what she had to say. Grayson felt the control he'd been so carefully cultivating slipping away. "Enough," he shouted, silencing the room. He took a deep breath, straightening his tie. "Melissa, show Ms. Humphrey in. It's time we all had a chat with our new majority shareholder." As Melissa hurried out, Grayson caught Marcus Bianchi's eye. The investor's expression was a mix of curiosity and barely concealed glee at Grayson's discomfort. "Well, Tanner," Bianchi said, leaning back in his chair with a smirk, "let's see how you handle this." Grayson gritted his teeth, bracing himself for what was sure to be a pivotal moment in his career. As the sound of heels clicking on marble grew closer, he steeled himself for the confrontation to come. The door opened, and Catherine Humphrey stepped into the room. Gone was the uncertain woman from the will reading. In her place stood someone transformed, confident, poised, and unmistakably in charge. She wore a tailored navy suit that exuded professionalism, her hair swept back in a sleek chignon. "Good morning, everyone," Catherine said, her voice clear and steady. "I apologize for the interruption, but I felt it was important that we speak as soon as possible." Grayson stood, forcing a smile. "Catherine, this is unexpected. We were just discussing the recent changes in ownership. Perhaps we could schedule a meeting later to—" "I think now is the perfect time, Grayson," Catherine interrupted, her tone brooking no argument. "After all, these changes affect everyone in this room." She turned to address the board members, who were watching the exchange with rapt attention. "I know you all must have questions and concerns. I want to assure you that I take this responsibility very seriously. I may be new to this industry, but I'm a quick learner, and I'm here to listen and collaborate." As Catherine continued to speak, outlining her initial thoughts and plans, Grayson felt a growing sense of unease. This was not the Catherine he remembered, the woman who had been content to stand in his shadow, to let him take the lead in all things. This Catherine was confident, articulate, and worst of all, she seemed to be winning over the board. He watched as Janet Chen nodded approvingly at Catherine's mention of sustainable business practices. Even Marcus Bianchi looked intrigued when she brought up potential new markets they could explore. Grayson knew he had to regain control of the situation. As Catherine finished her impromptu speech, he cleared his throat. "Thank you, Catherine, for that enlightening perspective," he said, trying to keep the edge out of his voice. "However, as I was explaining to the board before you arrived, while the ownership structure may have changed, the day-to-day operations of Tanner Shipping will continue under my leadership as CEO." Catherine turned to him, a small smile playing on her lips. "Of course, Grayson. Your experience is invaluable, but as majority shareholder, I think it's important that I be involved in major decisions moving forward. In fact, I've already scheduled meetings with some of our key partners to discuss potential new directions for the company." Grayson felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. "New directions? Catherine, you can't just come in here and start making unilateral decisions. There are processes, protocols." "I'm well aware of corporate governance, Grayson," Catherine cut him off smoothly, "which is why I've also called for an extraordinary general meeting next week. I think it's time we reviewed the company's leadership structure and ensured it aligns with our new vision." The implication was clear. Catherine wasn't just here to observe, she was here to take control. Grayson looked around the room, seeing the shifting allegiances in the eyes of the board members. The empire he had built so carefully was slipping through his fingers. As the meeting continued, with Catherine fielding questions from the board with surprising ease, Grayson felt increasingly sidelined. His mind raced, trying to find a way to turn this situation to his advantage, but every move seemed blocked. Finally, as the meeting drew to a close, Catherine turned to him with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Grayson, I think we should meet privately to discuss the transition. How about dinner tonight, for old time's sake?" Grayson nodded stiffly, knowing he had no choice but to agree. As the board members filed out, many of them stopping to introduce themselves to Catherine, Grayson remained at the head of the table, the weight of his new reality settling heavily on his shoulders. Marcus Bianchi was the last to leave. He paused by Grayson's chair, leaning down to whisper, "Impressive woman. Your ex-wife. Maybe Tanner Shipping is in good hands after all." As the door closed behind Bianchi, Grayson was left alone in the conference room, the empire he had built now feeling more like a house of cards on the verge of collapse. He pulled out his phone, his fingers hovering over Victoria's number. But what could he tell her? That in the space of a morning everything had changed. Instead, he found himself opening Sebastian's letter again, rereading the words that now seemed more like a prophecy than advice. "You're at a crossroads, Grayson. The path you're on leads to a lonely place. Trust me, I know, I've walked it, but it's not too late to change course." As he stared at the words, Grayson Tanner, the man who had always prided himself on being 10 steps ahead, found himself at a loss. For the first time in years, he had no idea what his next move should be. Outside the Tanner Shipping headquarters, Catherine Humphrey stepped into the warm California sunshine, taking a deep breath. The adrenaline that had carried her through the board meeting was starting to wear off, leaving her feeling shaky but exhilarated. As her driver opened the car door for her, Catherine caught sight of her reflection in the tinted window. For a moment, she hardly recognized herself. The confident businesswoman staring back at her seemed a far cry from the woman she'd been just days ago. Once inside the car, Catherine allowed herself a moment to decompress. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through the dozens of missed calls and messages. One name stood out: Lily Chen, Sebastian Callahan's former assistant. Remembering the young woman's nervousness at the will reading, Catherine hesitated for a moment before hitting the call button. After a few rings, Lily's voice came through, sounding anxious. "Miss Humphrey, I'm so glad you called. There's something important I need to tell you about your father and Tanner Shipping. Something that wasn't in the will or the letters. Can we meet?" Catherine felt a flutter of apprehension in her stomach. "Of course, Lily. How about coffee in an hour?" As she ended the call, Catherine couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the edge of yet another revelation, one that could change everything once again. The pieces were in motion, the players making their moves. But as the sun climbed higher over Long Beach, casting long shadows across the city, it was clear that the true game was only just beginning. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the polished marble floors of Grayson Tanner's corner office. He stood at the window, his reflection a ghostly overlay on the Long Beach skyline beyond. In his hand, a glass of scotch trembled slightly, the amber liquid catching the light. Grayson took a long sip, savoring the burn as it slid down his throat. It had been less than 24 hours since Catherine had stormed into the board meeting, upending everything he'd worked so hard to build. Now he was scrambling to hold onto the reins of his company, of his life. A soft knock at the door broke his reverie. "Come in," he called, not turning from the window. Melissa, his assistant, entered hesitantly. "Mr. Tanner, I have those reports you asked for. And there are some journalists in the lobby. They're asking for a statement about the change in ownership." Grayson's grip tightened on the glass. "Tell them no comment, and get our PR team working on a press release, something reassuring. We need to project stability." "Yes, sir," Melissa nodded, turning to leave. "Wait," Grayson said, finally facing her. "What are people saying, Melissa?" "The employees, I mean. Off the record." Melissa hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Well, sir, people are worried. There are rumors about layoffs, about the company being sold off in pieces. Some are already updating their resumes." Grayson nodded, dismissing her with a wave. As the door closed behind Melissa, he downed the rest of his scotch in one gulp. He needed a plan, and fast. Across town, in a small sun-drenched cafe near the beach, Catherine Humphrey sat across from Lily Chen, Sebastian Callahan's former assistant. The younger woman looked nervous, her eyes darting around as if expecting to be overheard. "Thank you for meeting me, Ms. Humphrey," Lily began, her voice low. "What I'm about to tell you, it could change everything." Catherine leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. "What is it, Lily?" What do you know about my father and Tanner Shipping? Lily took a deep breath, steeling herself. Your father, Mr. Callahan, he didn't just leave you his shares in Tanner Shipping on a whim. He had been planning this for years. He had evidence of financial irregularities, of deals that weren't exactly above board. Catherine felt her heart rate quicken. Are you saying Grayson was involved in illegal activities? Not exactly illegal, Lily hedged. More ethically questionable, cutting corners, manipulating contracts. Mr. Callahan believed that Grayson was heading down a dangerous path, one that could eventually bring the whole company down. As Lily continued to explain, pulling out a USB drive containing files Sebastian had compiled, Catherine's mind raced. This was more than just an inheritance. It was a responsibility. Her father hadn't just given her wealth and power. He'd entrusted her with the task of steering Tanner Shipping back onto an ethical course. Meanwhile, in the luxurious Belmont Shore mansion, Victoria Tanner paced the length of the master bedroom, her Louboutin heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor. She paused at the sound of the front door opening, tensing as Grayson's footsteps approached. When he entered the room, she could see the strain etched into every line of his face. "Well," she demanded, "what's the plan? How are we going to fix this mess?" Grayson loosened his tie, sinking onto the edge of the bed. "I'm working on it, Victoria. These things take time. We can't just—" "Time?" Victoria's voice rose sharply. "We don't have time, Grayson. Every minute that passes, that woman gains more control. Do you have any idea what people are saying? The looks I got at the country club today?" Grayson felt a flare of anger. "Is that really what you're worried about right now? Gossip at the country club?" Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Don't you dare dismiss me, Grayson. I've stood by you, helped you climb to the top. I will not let your ex-wife drag us back down." As their argument escalated, neither of them noticed the blinking light on Grayson's phone. A missed call from Marcus Bianchi, the message icon indicating a voicemail that would send shockwaves through their already fragile world. Over the next few weeks, Long Beach became a battlefield of corporate maneuvers and personal vendettas. Grayson, fighting to maintain control of Tanner Shipping, launched a charm offensive. He scheduled meetings with key investors, promising exciting new ventures and record-breaking profits. In interviews, he painted a picture of a company stronger than ever, with Catherine's inheritance bringing fresh energy and resources. But behind the scenes, Grayson was growing increasingly desperate. The voicemail from Marcus Bianchi had been clear. The investor was considering pulling out, spooked by the instability and attracted by Catherine's new vision for the company. Other partners were following suit, hedging their bets or openly aligning with Catherine. In a last-ditch effort to shore up support, Grayson called in every favor, leveraged every connection he had. He even reached out to old friends he'd discarded on his way up, swallowing his pride to ask for help. One such meeting found him in a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of town, sitting across from Jack Reeves, a former colleague he'd once betrayed to secure a promotion. "I've got to say, Grayson," Jack said, nursing a beer, "I never thought I'd see the day you'd come asking for my help. Must be pretty desperate, huh?" Grayson forced a chuckle, ignoring the jab. "Come on, Jack. Water under the bridge, right? Look, I know we've had our differences, but this is bigger than that. Catherine doesn't understand our world. If she stays in control, a lot of good people could lose their jobs." Jack studied him for a long moment. "You know, there was a time I would have believed that you actually cared about those good people. Now, I'm not so sure." As Jack stood to leave, Grayson felt a flash of the old anger, the ruthless ambition that had driven him for so long. But mixed with it now was something new, a gnawing doubt, a creeping realization that perhaps he had lost sight of what truly mattered. While Grayson struggled to hold on to his empire, Catherine was on a steep learning curve. Armed with the information Lily had provided, she dove headfirst into the world of corporate finance and maritime law. She hired a team of advisors, poring over contracts and financial reports late into the night. What she found both excited and terrified her. Tanner Shipping was indeed a powerful company, with the potential to do enormous good. But it was also a behemoth with tentacles reaching into murky ethical waters. Catherine realized that cleaning house wouldn't be easy, or without casualties. One particularly challenging day found her in a heated discussion with the head of Tanner Shipping's legal department, a man who had been with the company since its early days. "Ms. Humphrey," he said, his tone patronizing. I understand you want to make changes, but you have to realize that some of these practices are industry standard. If we start rocking the boat too much, we could lose our competitive edge." Catherine felt her temper flare. "Industry standard doesn't make it right, Mr. Dawson. We have an opportunity here to set a new standard to show that a company can be both profitable and ethical." As the lawyer sputtered protests, Catherine stood firm. It was in moments like these that she felt the weight of her father's legacy, spurring her on to be better, to do better. But it wasn't all battles and boardrooms. Catherine also found herself navigating the strange new world of wealth and privilege she had suddenly entered. There were charity galas to attend, social circles to penetrate, a whole unspoken language of power and influence to learn. At one such event, a fundraiser for the Long Beach Marine Conservation Institute, Catherine found herself face-to-face with Victoria Tanner. The two women eyed each other warily, champagne flutes in hand. "Catherine," Victoria said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "How lovely to see you. You're looking—" "Well," Catherine nodded, keeping her expression neutral. "Thank you, Victoria. You as well." A moment of awkward silence stretched between them before Victoria spoke again, her voice low and intense. "I hope you know what you're doing, Catherine. This isn't some game. People's livelihoods are at stake." Catherine met her gaze steadily. "I'm well aware of that, Victoria, which is why I'm committed to ensuring Tanner Shipping not only survives, but thrives, ethically and responsibly." As Victoria opened her mouth to respond, they were interrupted by a group of socialites, eager to meet the mysterious new heiress making waves in Long Beach. Catherine excused herself politely, leaving Victoria glaring after her. Back at the Tanner mansion, the strain was beginning to show in Grayson and Victoria's relationship. Late nights at the office, constant phone calls, and the ever-present cloud of stress were taking their toll. One evening, as Grayson pored over financial reports in his home office, Victoria appeared in the doorway, dressed to the nines. "The Hendersons' anniversary party is tonight," she said, her tone clipped. "I assumed you'd forgotten." Grayson looked up, blinking in confusion. "That's tonight. Damn it, I can't go, Victoria. I'm in the middle of—" "Save it," Victoria cut him off. "I'll make your excuses." Again. She turned to leave, then paused. "You know, Grayson, when I married you, I thought I was signing up for a partnership. Lately, it feels more like I'm just another asset you're trying to manage." As the door slammed behind her, Grayson slumped in his chair. He reached for the bottle of scotch on his desk, then stopped himself. He needed a clear head if he was going to find a way out of this mess. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, the landscape of power in Long Beach began to shift. Catherine, guided by her advisors and her own growing confidence, started implementing changes at Tanner Shipping. She introduced new environmental policies, launched a review of all major contracts, and began exploring partnerships with sustainable technology companies. To Grayson's surprise and grudging admiration, many of these changes were well received. The company's stock, after an initial dip, began to stabilize and even climb. Employees, once wary of the new boss, started to rally behind Catherine's vision of a more ethical, forward-thinking Tanner Shipping. Watching from the sidelines, Grayson felt a complex mix of emotions. Pride in the company he had built, now flourishing under new leadership, resentment at being sidelined, and something else, something he couldn't quite name, a wistful wondering of what might have been if he had made different choices along the way. As autumn settled over Long Beach, bringing with it a crispness to the air and a golden quality to the light, both Catherine and Grayson found themselves at crossroads. For Catherine, the initial whirlwind of change was settling into a steadier rhythm. She had proven herself capable, earning the respect of employees and industry peers alike. But with this success came new challenges. There were still old guard members resistant to change, partnerships to be navigated, and the constant pressure of living up to her father's legacy. One crisp morning, as she walked along the beach before heading into the office, Catherine found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed. The sound of waves lapping at the shore soothed her, providing a moment of calm in her now chaotic life. Her phone buzzed, another email from Grayson, requesting a meeting. Despite the changes she'd implemented, he was still CEO, a fact that created constant tension. Catherine sighed, realizing it was time to make a decision about Grayson's future with the company. Meanwhile, Grayson was facing his own moment of truth. The past months had been a humbling experience, forcing him to confront the consequences of his past actions. He had watched as Catherine implemented changes he had always dismissed as impractical or idealistic, only to see them succeed. In quiet moments, usually late at night when sleep eluded him, Grayson found himself rereading Sebastian's letter. The words that had once filled him with anger now resonated differently. He thought about the man he had been when he first started Tanner Shipping, the dreams he'd had of building something meaningful. It was during one of these late-night reflections that Grayson made a decision. He would meet with Catherine, not to fight or manipulate, but to genuinely collaborate. It was time to put aside their past and work together for the future of the company they both cared about. The meeting was set for a Friday afternoon. Catherine, anticipating another tense encounter, was surprised to find a different Grayson waiting for her in the conference room. Gone was the aggressive, defensive posture of recent months. Instead, he seemed open. "Catherine," he began, his voice lacking its usual sharp edge, "I've been doing a lot of thinking about the company, about the changes you've been making, about the kind of legacy I want to leave." Catherine listened, cautious but intrigued, as Grayson outlined a proposal. He wanted to work with her, to combine his experience and industry knowledge with her fresh perspective and ethical stance. Together, he argued, they could take Tanner Shipping to new heights. As Grayson spoke, Catherine felt a glimmer of hope. This was the man she had once loved, the visionary she had believed in. Could they really find a way to work together? Hours passed as they talked, debated, and eventually began to plan. By the time the sun set over Long Beach, casting a warm glow through the conference room windows, Catherine and Grayson had hammered out the beginnings of a new partnership. They emerged from the meeting, both feeling a sense of cautious optimism. Employees who had been watching the power struggle unfold for months were shocked to see their two leaders walking together, engaged in animated conversation. As news of the apparent reconciliation spread, the atmosphere at Tanner Shipping began to shift. The tension that had permeated the offices for months began to dissipate. Employees who had been hedging their bets, unsure of where to place their loyalty, breathed sighs of relief. In the following weeks, Catherine and Grayson presented a united front. They held town halls with employees, met with investors, and gave joint interviews to the press. The narrative was clear. Tanner Shipping was entering a new era, combining the best of its past with an ethical, sustainable vision for the future. The market responded positively. Tanner Shipping's stock rose steadily, and new partnership opportunities began to emerge. It seemed that the tumultuous period following Sebastian Callahan's will reading was finally coming to an end. Even Victoria, who had been growing increasingly distant from Grayson, seemed to soften. Seeing her husband energized and purposeful again rekindled something of their old connection. They began to talk about the future again, making plans that didn't revolve solely around the company. As the holiday season approached, bringing with it a festive atmosphere to Long Beach, there was a sense of resolution in the air. Catherine had proven herself a capable leader. Grayson had found a new purpose, and Tanner Shipping was stronger than ever. At the company's holiday party, held at a beautifully decorated waterfront venue, Catherine and Grayson stood side by side, addressing the gathered employees and their families. As they raised a toast to the future of Tanner Shipping, the applause was genuine and heartfelt. Later that evening, as the party wound down, Catherine found a quiet moment alone on the venue's balcony. She looked out over the twinkling lights of Long Beach, reflecting on the incredible journey of the past year. She thought of her father, wondering if this was what he had envisioned when he made the decision to leave her his fortune. Had he known that she and Grayson would find a way to work together? Had he foreseen the positive changes they could make? As if summoned by her thoughts, Grayson joined her on the balcony. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, both lost in their own reflections. "You know," Grayson said finally, "I think old Sebastian would be proud of both of us." Catherine nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "I think you're right." As they turned to rejoin the party, there was a sense of a chapter closing, of conflicts resolved and a bright future ahead. Catherine felt a weight lift from her shoulders, the burden of her unexpected inheritance finally feeling more like a gift than a curse. But life, as Catherine and Grayson were about to be reminded, is rarely so neat and tidy, for even as they celebrated their hard-won peace, forces were aligning that would soon test their newfound partnership to its very limits. In a dimly lit office across town, a figure hunched over a computer, scrolling through files stolen from Tanner Shipping's servers. Emails, financial records, contracts, all painting a picture of the company's past misdeeds and current vulnerabilities. The figure leaned back, a slow smile spreading across their face. This was exactly what they had been looking for, the ammunition needed to bring Tanner Shipping to its knees. With a few keystrokes, the stolen data was encrypted and sent to a secure server. The figure then picked up a burner phone, dialing a number from memory. "It's done," they said simply when the call connected. "We have everything we need. Tanner Shipping won't know what hit them." As the call ended, the figure stood stretching after hours of hunched concentration. Outside, the Long Beach night was alive with the sounds of celebration. But for Tanner Shipping, the real fireworks were yet to come. Back at the holiday party, blissfully unaware of the looming threat, Catherine and Grayson mingled with employees and their families. The atmosphere was festive, filled with laughter and the clinking of champagne glasses. Victoria, resplendent in a designer gown, approached the pair, her smile tight but present. "Well, you two certainly know how to throw a party," she said, sipping her champagne. "I must say I'm impressed by how well you've managed to smooth things over." Catherine nodded politely, still unsure of how to interact with her predecessor. "Thank you, Victoria. It's been a team effort." Grayson, sensing the tension, quickly changed the subject. "Have you had a chance to try the hors d'oeuvres? The caterer outdid themselves this year." As the conversation drifted to safer topics, none of them could have imagined the storm that was brewing just beyond the horizon of their newfound peace. The party wound down in the early hours of the morning, with tired but happy employees filing out into the cool night air. Catherine, Grayson, and Victoria were among the last to leave, saying their goodbyes to the venue staff. As they stood waiting for their respective cars, an uncomfortable silence fell over the trio. Despite the apparent reconciliation between Catherine and Grayson, there was still an undercurrent of unresolved tension. Victoria broke the silence first. "Well, this has been enlightening. Grayson, darling, shall we?" Grayson nodded, then turned to Catherine. "Good night, Catherine. We'll talk more about those new contracts on Monday." "Of course," Catherine replied. "Have a good weekend, both of you." As Grayson and Victoria's car pulled away, Catherine couldn't shake a nagging feeling of unease. Despite the successes of the past few months, despite the apparent thawing of relations with Grayson, something felt off. She shook her head, trying to dispel the feeling. It was probably just fatigue, she told herself. The past year had been a whirlwind, and she was still adjusting to her new reality. As her own car arrived and she slid into the back seat, Catherine allowed herself a moment of reflection. She had come so far, learned so much. Surely whatever challenges lay ahead, she was equipped to handle them. Little did she know, the true test of her resolve and of her fragile alliance with Grayson was just around the corner. The following Monday dawned bright and clear, a perfect Southern California winter day. Catherine arrived at Tanner Shipping headquarters early, eager to get a head start on the week. As she walked through the lobby, she noticed an unusual buzz of activity. Employees were huddled in small groups, speaking in hushed tones. Conversations stopped abruptly as she passed, replaced by forced smiles and overly cheerful good mornings. By the time Catherine reached her office, the sense of unease she had felt after the party had blossomed into full-fledged anxiety. Something was wrong. Her suspicions were confirmed moments later when Melissa, Grayson's assistant, burst into her office without knocking, something she had never done before. "Ms. Humphrey," Melissa gasped, her face pale. "You need to see this, now." She thrust a tablet into Catherine's hands. On the screen was a news article from one of the country's most respected business journals. The headline made Catherine's blood run cold. "Tanner Shipping Scandal. Leaked documents reveal years of fraud and environmental violations." As Catherine scanned the article, her heart sinking with each paragraph, she realized that their hard-won peace had been nothing but a brief interlude. The real battle for Tanner Shipping, and for her own legacy, was about to begin. The story painted a damning picture of Tanner Shipping's past practices, detailing years of financial manipulation, environmental negligence, and ethical breaches. Many of the incidents dated back to before Catherine's involvement with the company, but some were more recent, falling squarely within her tenure as majority shareholder. Catherine's mind raced. How had this information gotten out? Who could have had access to such detailed records? And most importantly, how were they going to handle this crisis? As if in answer to her unspoken questions, her phone buzzed with a text from Grayson. "Emergency board meeting, 30 minutes, war room." Catherine took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was sure to be a grueling day. As she gathered her things and headed for the war room, she couldn't help but wonder, had the apparent reconciliation with Grayson been genuine, or had he been biding his time, waiting for an opportunity to undermine her? The war room was already buzzing with activity when Catherine arrived. Board members, legal counsel, and PR representatives were engaged in heated discussions, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of panic and accusation. Grayson stood at the head of the table, his face a mask of controlled fury. When he saw Catherine enter, something flashed in his eyes. Relief, worry. It was gone too quickly for her to be sure. "Catherine," he said, his voice tight. "Good. You're here. We need to formulate a response, and fast. This story is spreading like wildfire." As Catherine took her seat, she noticed the wary glances from other board members. She could almost hear their thoughts. Was she involved? Did she know about these practices? Can she handle this crisis? The next few hours were a blur of strategy sessions, legal consultations, and drafted statements. Catherine found herself in the unusual position of defending practices she had been working to change, all while trying to project confidence and control. As the day wore on, more details emerged. The leaked documents had been sent anonymously to several major news outlets. The source claimed to be a whistleblower within Tanner Shipping, someone with high-level access to company records. This revelation sent a new wave of paranoia through the room. Everyone was eyeing each other suspiciously, wondering who among them could be the leak. It was late evening by the time they had a cohesive strategy in place. They would acknowledge past mistakes, emphasize the changes that had been implemented under Catherine's leadership, and promise a full internal investigation. As the room began to clear, Catherine found herself alone with Grayson for the first time since the story broke. The weight of the day showed on both their faces. "Catherine," Grayson began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "I want you to know, I had nothing to do with this. Whatever you might be thinking, I believe you," Catherine interrupted, surprising herself with the realization that she did in fact trust him in this. "But Grayson, we both know this isn't over. Whoever leaked this information, they're not done. This is just the opening salvo." Grayson nodded grimly. "You're right, we're in for a fight. But Catherine, we're in this together now. Whatever happened in the past, we need to present a united front if we're going to weather this storm." As they shook hands, sealing their alliance in the face of this new threat, neither of them could have predicted just how severe that storm would become, or how it would test the limits of their newfound partnership. Outside the Tanner Shipping headquarters, the Long Beach night was alive with the buzz of breaking news. Reporters camped out on the sidewalk, hoping to catch a glimpse of Catherine or Grayson. Social media was alight with speculation and outrage. And in a nondescript apartment across town, the figure responsible for the leak sat back, satisfied with the chaos they had unleashed. Phase 1 was complete. Now, it was time to prepare for Phase 2. As Catherine and Grayson steeled themselves for the battle ahead, the true test of their leadership and of Tanner Shipping's future was only just beginning. The following weeks were a maelstrom of activity for Tanner Shipping. Catherine and Grayson found themselves working around the clock, putting out fires and trying to stay ahead of the seemingly endless stream of revelations. Each day brought new challenges. Investors were pulling out, frightened by the volatility and negative press. Long-standing contracts were being reconsidered. Environmental groups were staging protests outside their offices, demanding accountability for years of alleged negligence. Through it all, Catherine and Grayson presented a united front. They held press conferences, met with key stakeholders, and worked tirelessly to implement new transparency measures. But behind closed doors, the strain was beginning to show. One particularly grueling evening, as they pored over the latest batch of leaked documents in Catherine's office, Grayson finally broke the tension. "How much did you know?" he asked quietly, not looking up from the papers spread before him. Catherine froze, her coffee mug halfway to her lips. "What do you mean?" Grayson finally met her gaze, his eyes tired but intense. "About all of this. The corner cutting, the cover-ups. You've been in charge for months now. Did you really not see any of it?" For a moment, Catherine felt a flare of anger. How dare he insinuate that she was complicit? But as quickly as it came, the anger faded, replaced by a gnawing doubt. Should she have seen it? Had she been so focused on moving forward that she'd failed to truly reckon with the company's past? She began, then stopped, choosing her words carefully. I knew there were issues, Grayson. That's why I started implementing changes as soon as I took over. But the scale of this... No, I didn't know, did you? It was Grayson's turn to pause, conflict evident on his face. Some of it, he admitted finally. Not everything, but enough that I should have done more to stop it. The admission hung heavy in the air between them. For a moment they were no longer business partners or even ex-spouses, but two people grappling with the weight of their choices and the unexpected turns their lives had taken. The moment was shattered by a sharp knock at the door. Melissa, Grayson's assistant, entered, her face pale. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said, her voice shaking slightly, but you need to see this. She handed Catherine a tablet. On the screen was an email, sent to every employee of Tanner Shipping, as well as to major news outlets. The sender was anonymous, but the content was explosive. The email contained detailed accounts of recent board meetings, including private conversations between Catherine and Grayson. It painted a picture of two leaders scrambling to cover up past misdeeds rather than truly address them. But the real bombshell came at the end of the email. For those wondering about the source of these leaks, wonder no more. I am Victoria Tanner, wife of Grayson Tanner, and the woman who has stood silently by as this company destroyed lives and environments in the name of profit. No more. It's time for the truth to come out, no matter the cost. Catherine and Grayson stared at each other in shock. Victoria. It seemed impossible, and yet... I have to go, Grayson said abruptly, already heading for the door. I need to talk to her to understand Jua. But as he reached for the handle, the door burst open. A team of FBI agents flooded into the room, led by a stern-faced woman in a dark suit. Catherine Humphrey, Grayson Tanner, she announced, her voice ringing with authority. I'm Special Agent Reyes. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of fraud, environmental violations, and obstruction of justice. As they were led out of the office in handcuffs, past shocked employees and flashing cameras, Catherine felt as if she were in a dream. How had it come to this? How had her attempt to honor her father's legacy and make positive changes led her here? The next few days were a blur of interrogations, legal meetings, and sleepless nights in holding cells. Catherine and Grayson were kept separate, each left to wonder about the other's involvement and Victoria's betrayal. It was during one of these long, lonely nights that Catherine received an unexpected visitor. James Woodward, the lawyer who had read Sebastian Callahan's will all those months ago, was shown into her cell. Ms. Humphrey, he said, his voice grave, I'm afraid I have some difficult information to share with you. Catherine steeled herself, wondering what else could possibly go wrong. What is it, Mr. Woodward? The lawyer took a deep breath. It's about your father, Sebastian Callahan, and about the inheritance he left you. As Woodward began to speak, Catherine felt the ground shift beneath her feet once again. The story he told was almost too incredible to believe, and yet, as the pieces fell into place, she realized it explained so much. Sebastian Callahan, it turned out, had not been the successful, ethical businessman he'd presented himself as. In reality, he had built his fortune through a complex web of fraud, insider trading, and environmental exploitation. The same practices that Tanner Shipping was now being accused of had been standard operating procedure for Callahan Industries for decades. But why? Catherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why leave it all to me? Why not just take his secrets to the grave? Woodward's expression was a mixture of pity and resignation. From what we've been able to piece together, Ms. Humphrey, your father was dying with a guilty conscience. He saw in you a chance for redemption, not just for himself, but for the entire corrupt system he'd been a part of. By making me clean up his mess, Catherine finished, the realization dawning on her with a sickening clarity. Woodward nodded. So it seems he believed that by putting his fortune in the hands of someone untainted by the industry's corrupt practices, someone with a strong moral compass, he could set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately force a reckoning within the entire sector. As the full implications of this revelation sank in, Catherine felt a complex mix of emotions wash over her. Anger at being used as a pawn in her father's posthumous game of redemption, grief for the relationship she'd never have with a man she'd never really known, and underneath it all, a steely determination to see this through, to find a way to make something good come out of this tangled web of deceit and manipulation. Meanwhile, across town, Grayson Tanner sat in his own cell grappling with his own demons. The betrayal by Victoria cut deep, but not as deep as the realization of how far he'd strayed from the idealistic young man who'd started Tanner Shipping with dreams of changing the world. As he sat there, head in his hands, he heard the cell door open. Looking up, he was shocked to see Marcus Bianchi, his once loyal investor, standing there with a guard. "You have 10 minutes, the guard said gruffly, before stepping out. Marcus regarded Grayson with a mixture of disappointment and something that might have been pity. "Oh, how the mighty have fallen," he said, shaking his head. Grayson straightened, some of his old fire returning. "If you've come to gloat, Marcus, save it. I'm not in the mood." "Gloat?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "No, Grayson. I've come to offer you a way out." As Marcus outlined his proposal, Grayson felt a chill run down his spine. The offer was tempting, a chance to salvage some of his fortune to avoid the worst of the legal consequences. All he had to do was throw Catherine under the bus, to paint her as the mastermind behind Tanner Shipping's recent troubles. "Think about it," Marcus said as he prepared to leave. "You've got until tomorrow to decide. After that, well..." He shrugged, leaving the threat unspoken. Left alone once more, Grayson found himself at a crossroads. The path of least resistance lay before him. Sacrifice Catherine, save himself. It was the kind of ruthless decision he'd made countless times in his rise to the top. But as he contemplated this option, he found himself thinking of Sebastian's letter, of the man he'd once been and the legacy he'd hoped to leave. And for the first time in years, Grayson Tanner felt the stirring of something he'd thought long dead, his conscience. As dawn broke over Long Beach, casting long shadows across the city, the stage was set for a final confrontation that would determine the fate of Tanner Shipping and all those caught in its orbit. The courthouse was a media circus, journalists and protesters jostling for position as Catherine and Grayson were led inside. The air was thick with tension, everyone sensing that today's proceedings would be anything but ordinary. As the judge called the court to order, Catherine's lawyer stood, a grim expression on his face. "Your Honor, before we proceed, my client would like to address the court." A murmur ran through the assembled crowd as Catherine made her way to the stand. She took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the room before landing on Grayson. For a moment, their gazes locked, a lifetime of history passing between them in that single look. "Your Honor," Catherine began, her voice steady despite her nerves, "I stand before you today not to proclaim my innocence, but to take responsibility. Responsibility not just for my actions, but for the actions of those who came before me." As Catherine continued laying bare the full extent of Sebastian Callahan's manipulations and her own unwitting role in perpetuating a corrupt system, the courtroom sat in stunned silence. She spoke of her father's misguided attempt at redemption, of the rot that had infected not just Tanner Shipping, but the entire industry. "I cannot undo the damage that has been done," she concluded, her voice thick with emotion, "but I can dedicate myself to making it right, to using the resources at my disposal to clean up our oceans, to compensate those who have been harmed, and to set a new standard for corporate responsibility." As Catherine stepped down, the courtroom erupted into chaos. But before the judge could restore order, Grayson stood, his face set with determination. "Your Honor," he called out, his voice cutting through the din, "I request permission to address the court as well." What followed was a testimony that left even the most jaded courtroom veterans in shock. Grayson laid out in painstaking detail the years of corruption, the deals made in smoke-filled rooms, the lives and environments carelessly destroyed in the pursuit of profit. He implicated himself fully, refusing to shy away from his own culpability. But he didn't stop there. Grayson went on to expose a network of corruption that extended far beyond Tanner Shipping, implicating politicians, other industry leaders, and even members of the judiciary. By the time he finished, it was clear that this case had exploded into something far larger than anyone had anticipated. As the implications of these revelations began to sink in, the courtroom doors burst open. FBI agents swarmed in, led by Special Agent Reyes, but they weren't there for Catherine and Grayson. "Marcus Bianchi," Reyes announced, her voice ringing out over the commotion, "you're under arrest for racketeering, bribery, and conspiracy to obstruct justice." As Bianchi was led away in handcuffs, sputtering protests and threats, Catherine and Grayson exchanged a look of stunned disbelief. The house of cards was truly collapsing now, and they were at the epicenter. The judge, visibly shaken by the day's events, called for an immediate recess. As Catherine and Grayson were led back to their holding cells, neither spoke. There was no need for words. They both understood that whatever happened next, nothing would ever be the same. Hours passed as the justice system grappled with the scale of the revelations. Finally, as evening fell, Catherine and Grayson were summoned back to the courtroom. The judge's face was grave as he addressed them. In light of the extraordinary circumstances and your cooperation, this court is inclined to show leniency. However, actions must have consequences. The sentence, when it came, was a mixture of punishment and opportunity. Catherine and Grayson would avoid jail time, but Tanner Shipping would be dissolved. Its assets would be used to create a new foundation dedicated to environmental restoration and corporate reform, with Catherine and Grayson required to work together to lead this effort as part of their rehabilitation. As they left the courthouse, blinking in the harsh glare of camera flashes, Catherine turned to Grayson. "So," she said, a hint of their old familiarity creeping into her voice. "Partners again?" Grayson managed a wry smile. "Looks like it. Think we can do better this time around?" Before Catherine could respond, they were approached by a young woman who had been waiting on the courthouse steps. It took a moment for Catherine to recognize her, Lily Chen, Sebastian Callahan's former assistant. "Ms. Humphrey, Mr. Tanner," Lily said, her voice urgent. "There's something you need to know, something about Victoria." As Lily began to speak, Catherine and Grayson listened in growing astonishment. The story she told was almost too incredible to believe, and yet it explained so much. Victoria, it turned out, had not been working alone. She had been part of a larger conspiracy, one that included Sebastian Callahan himself, the leaks, the carefully orchestrated downfall of Tanner Shipping. It had all been part of a plan set in motion years ago. But why? Catherine asked, struggling to process this final twist. What was the point of all this? Lily handed them a flash drive. "This contains the full explanation." In Sebastian's own words, he recorded it just before he died. But the short version, he believed the entire system was beyond saving. The only way to bring about real change was to burn it all down and start over. As the implications of this revelation sank in, Catherine and Grayson stood in stunned silence. They had been pawns in a game far larger and more complex than they could have imagined, manipulated by forces beyond their control. But as they stood there, the weight of their shared history and the magnitude of the task ahead settling over them, something unexpected happened. Grayson reached out, taking Catherine's hand in his own. For a moment, they were transported back to the beginning of their relationship, to the idealistic young couple who had dreamed of changing the world. And in that moment, despite everything that had happened, a spark of that old dream flickered back to life. "Well," Grayson said, a hint of his old confidence returning, "if we're going to burn it all down and start over, we might as well do it right." Catherine felt a smile tugging at her lips, the first real smile in what felt like years. "Together?" she asked, squeezing his hand. Grayson nodded, his eyes meeting hers with a mixture of determination and something that might have been hope. Together. As they walked away from the courthouse hand in hand, neither Catherine nor Grayson could have predicted the challenges that lay ahead. The road to redemption would be long and difficult, fraught with obstacles and setbacks. But for the first time in a long time, they both felt something they had thought lost forever: purpose. And as the sun set over Long Beach, casting long shadows across a city on the brink of transformation, Catherine and Grayson stepped forward into an uncertain future, ready to face whatever came next. Little did they know, the game was far from over. In the shadows, new players were already moving into position, ready to challenge the fragile new order Catherine and Grayson hoped to build. The stage was set for the next act in this ongoing drama of power, redemption, and the never-ending quest for justice, in a world where the lines between right and wrong are never as clear as they seem. As night fell over Long Beach, the city held its breath, waiting to see what the dawn would bring. For Catherine Humphrey and Grayson Tanner, it was not an ending, but a new beginning, one that would test them in ways they could never have imagined. The real battle, it seemed, was only just beginning. The weeks following the dramatic courtroom revelations saw Long Beach in a state of upheaval. The dissolution of Tanner Shipping, once the crown jewel of the city's business community, sent shockwaves through every level of society. As the dust began to settle, The true scope of the corruption exposed by Catherine and Grayson became clear, reaching far beyond the shipping industry into politics, law enforcement, and even the judiciary. For Catherine Humphrey and Grayson Tanner, the aftermath was a whirlwind of activity. The creation of the new foundation, provisionally named the Callahan-Tanner Initiative for Corporate Responsibility and Environmental Restoration, consumed their days and nights. They found themselves working closely together once again, but this time with a shared purpose that went beyond profit margins and stock prices. One crisp autumn morning, Catherine stood at the window of their new offices, a converted warehouse space near the port. The view was a far cry from Grayson's old penthouse office, but she found she preferred it. From here, she could see the real impact of their work, ships being retrofitted with cleaner technology, new green spaces being developed along the waterfront, and a bustling job training center for former Tanner shipping employees. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Grayson's voice broke through her reverie. She turned to find him leaning against the doorframe, 2 cups of coffee in hand. Catherine accepted the offered cup with a small smile. "Just thinking about how much has changed. A year ago, I never could have imagined any of this." Grayson nodded, moving to stand beside her at the window. "I know what you mean. Sometimes I wake up and think it's all been a dream, or a nightmare, depending on the day." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, sipping their coffee and watching the bustle of activity below. The easy camaraderie that had developed between them over the past weeks still surprised Catherine at times. It wasn't the passionate love they'd once shared, nor the bitter enmity that had followed their divorce. It was something new, a partnership forged in the fires of shared adversity and a common goal. "Have you heard from Victoria?" Catherine asked, breaking the silence. Grayson's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "No," he said after a pause. Not since everything came out. Last I heard, she was in Europe somewhere, lying low until the media frenzy dies down." Catherine nodded, unsure of what to say. Victoria's role in the downfall of Tanner Shipping, and in the larger conspiracy orchestrated by Sebastian Callahan, was still a sore point for Grayson. Despite everything, Catherine knew a part of him still cared for his ex-wife, still grappled with the betrayal. "And you?" Grayson asked, turning the tables. "How are you holding up with everything?" Catherine knew he was referring to the revelations about her father, about the true motivations behind her inheritance. It was a wound that was still raw, a complex tangle of emotions she was only beginning to unravel. "I'm processing," she said finally. "Some days I hate him for what he did, for using me as a pawn in his game. Other days I find myself understanding, even respecting his motivations, twisted as they were." Grayson reached out, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. The gesture was unexpected but not unwelcome. "He was a complicated man," Grayson said softly. "But whatever his faults, whatever his motivations, he gave you the power to make a real difference. And that's exactly what you're doing." Catherine felt a lump form in her throat, touched by Grayson's words and the sincerity behind them. Before she could respond, however, they were interrupted by a knock at the door. Lily Chen, now working as their executive assistant, poked her head in. "Sorry to interrupt, but your 10 o'clock is here. The representatives from the Dockworkers Union?" Catherine and Grayson exchanged a look, the moment broken. It was time to get back to work. As they made their way to the conference room, Catherine marveled at how seamlessly she and Grayson had fallen into their new roles. There were still moments of tension, of course. Old habits and hurts didn't disappear overnight. But there was also a newfound respect, a shared commitment to doing better, to being better. The meeting with the union representatives was long and at times contentious. The dissolution of Tanner Shipping had left many workers in limbo, and while the new foundation was creating jobs, there were still gaps to be filled. Catherine and Grayson listened attentively, taking notes and offering solutions where they could. As the union reps filed out, looking cautiously optimistic, Catherine couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This was what real leadership looked like, not hiding in a penthouse office, making decisions that affected thousands without ever seeing their faces, but being on the ground, listening, and working collaboratively to find solutions. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and strategy sessions. It was well past sunset by the time Catherine and Grayson found themselves alone again, slumped in chairs in the conference room, surrounded by empty takeout containers and half-drunk cups of coffee. "We need to talk about the Palmer contract," Grayson said, rubbing his eyes tiredly. "If we can get them on board with the new environmental standards, it could set a precedent for the entire industry." Catherine nodded, stifling a yawn. "Agreed, but that's a battle for tomorrow. Right now I think we both need some rest." As they gathered their things to leave, Catherine was struck by a sudden wave of nostalgia. How many late nights had they spent like this in the early days of their marriage, dreaming big dreams and making plans for the future? "Grayson," she said impulsively, "do you ever wonder if things had been different? If we hadn't lost sight of what really mattered?" She trailed off, unsure of how to finish the thought. Grayson looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Every day," he said, finally, his voice soft. "But maybe this is our second chance. Not to be what we were, but to be something better." Catherine felt her heart skip a beat at his words. Before she could respond, Grayson's phone buzzed, breaking the moment. He glanced at it and frowned. "It's Marcus Bianchi's lawyer," he said, his tone shifting back to business. "They want to talk plea deal. Apparently Bianchi's willing to give up some pretty big names in exchange for leniency." Catherine nodded, pushing aside the lingering emotion from their near moment. "We should hear them out. If Bianchi's information can help root out more corruption, it's worth considering." As they left the office, stepping out into the cool night air, Catherine was struck by how different the city felt. The glittering skyline that had once represented the pinnacle of success now seemed somehow hollow, a facade hiding the rot beneath. But there was also a sense of possibility in the air, a feeling that real change was not only possible, but already underway. The next few weeks saw a flurry of activity as the fallout from the Tanner shipping scandal continued to ripple through Long Beach and beyond. Marcus Bianchi's plea deal opened up new avenues of investigation, leading to a series of high-profile arrests that sent shockwaves through the business and political establishments. Catherine and Grayson found themselves at the center of a media storm, hailed as whistleblowers and reformers by some, vilified as traitors to their class by others. They weathered the attention as best they could, focusing on the work of the foundation and the tangible changes they were beginning to see in the community. One particularly memorable day found them at the grand opening of a new community center in one of Long Beach's underserved neighborhoods. The center, funded by the Callahan Tanner Initiative, would provide job training, childcare, and other essential services to local residents. As Catherine cut the ribbon, surrounded by cheering community members and flashing cameras, she caught Grayson's eye in the crowd. The pride and warmth in his gaze made her heart swell. This, she realized, was what true success felt like, not the cold satisfaction of a rising stock price, but the genuine joy of making a positive difference in people's lives. The celebration was in full swing when Catherine felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find James Woodward, the lawyer who had read Sebastian Callahan's will all those months ago. "Ms. Humphrey," he said, his expression grave, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something you need to see." He led her to a quiet corner away from the festivities and handed her an envelope. "This was left with my office to be delivered to you on this day. It's from your father." With trembling hands, Catherine opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in Sebastian Callahan's distinctive handwriting. "My dearest Catherine, if you're reading this, then everything has gone according to plan. The old system has been exposed, the corrupt power structures shaken to their core. And you, my daughter, have been instrumental in bringing about this change. I know you must have questions, must feel anger and betrayal at the role I forced you to play, but I hope that by now you've come to understand the necessity of what we've done. The world we lived in was broken, Catherine. The pursuit of profit at any cost was destroying not just our environment, but the very fabric of our society. Someone had to take a stand to force a reckoning, and who better than a man with nothing left to lose and a daughter with the strength and integrity to build something better from the ashes? I won't ask for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I do ask that you continue the work we've started. The Callahan Tanner Initiative has the potential to be so much more than just a corporate responsibility foundation. It can be the seed of a new way of doing business, a model for a more just and sustainable future. You have within you the power to change the world, Catherine, not through ruthless ambition or cold calculation, but through compassion, integrity, and a genuine desire to do what's right. I may not have been the father you deserved in life, but in death I hope I've given you the tools to become the leader, the world so desperately needs. With all my love and faith in you, Sebastian." As Catherine finished reading, she felt a maelstrom of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Anger, grief, pride, determination, they swirled within her, each fighting for dominance. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice Grayson approach until he spoke. "Catherine, are you all right?" She looked up at him, blinking back tears she hadn't realized were forming. Without a word, she handed him the letter. As Grayson read, his expression shifted from concern to shock to a kind of grim understanding. When he finished, he looked at Catherine, his eyes searching her face. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly. Catherine took a deep breath, trying to sort through the tumult of her thoughts. "I'm thinking," she said slowly, "that my father was both a brilliant visionary and a manipulative bastard, and I'm not sure whether to thank him or curse him." Grayson nodded, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Sounds about right. So, what do we do now?" Catherine looked out at the celebration still in full swing, at the faces of the people whose lives they were working to improve. She thought about the challenges that still lay ahead, the entrenched interests that would fight tooth and nail against the changes they were trying to implement, and then she thought about the opportunity they had been given, the chance to truly remake the system from the ground up, to create a new model of business that prioritized people and planet alongside profit. "We do exactly what we've been doing," she said finally, a new determination settling over her. "We keep pushing forward, keep fighting for what's right, but now we think bigger. We take the Callahan-Tanner Initiative global. We use our story, our experiences, to inspire change on a larger scale." Grayson's eyes lit up with the familiar fire of a new challenge. "It won't be easy," he warned. "We'll be going up against some of the most powerful interests in the world." Catherine smiled, feeling for the first time in months a sense of true purpose, of rightness in her path. Since when have we ever shied away from a challenge? As they rejoined the celebration, Catherine felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with obstacles and potential pitfalls. But for the first time since inheriting her father's fortune, she felt truly worthy of the legacy he had left her. Not the money or the power, but the opportunity to make a real, lasting difference in the world. The following month saw Long Beach undergo a transformation. The Callahan-Tanner Initiative's influence spread beyond the shipping industry, touching every aspect of the city's economy and social fabric. New, sustainable businesses began to spring up, attracted by the Foundation's support and the city's growing reputation as a hub for ethical enterprise. Catherine and Grayson found themselves at the forefront of this change, working tirelessly to implement their vision of a more just and sustainable business model. Their partnership, once fractured by ambition and betrayal, had been reforged in the crucible of shared purpose. One evening, nearly a year after the fateful will reading that had set everything in motion, Catherine and Grayson stood on the balcony of their office, looking out over the city they had helped to transform. "Do you ever miss it?" Catherine asked suddenly. "The old days, I mean. The power, the prestige." Grayson was quiet for a moment, considering. "Sometimes," he admitted finally. "It's hard not to. But then I look at what we're building here, the real impact we're having, and I realize this is worth so much more." Catherine nodded, understanding completely. She too had moments of nostalgia for the simpler times, before the weight of her inheritance and the responsibility it entailed had changed everything. But like Grayson, she wouldn't trade their current path for anything. As they stood there, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Catherine was struck by a sudden realization. "You know," she said, turning to Grayson with a smile, "I think this is the first time in my life I truly feel like I'm living up to my potential, like I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." Grayson returned her smile, reaching out to take her hand. The gesture was comfortable, familiar in a way that spoke of their shared history and newfound partnership. "I know exactly what you mean," he said softly. As night fell over Long Beach, Catherine and Grayson remained on the balcony, talking quietly about their plans for the future. They spoke of expanding the initiative's reach, of challenging other corporations to adopt their model, of using their platform to push for policy changes at the highest levels. But they also spoke of personal matters, of healing old wounds, of forgiveness, of the possibility of a future together that neither of them had dared to imagine until now. As they finally prepared to leave for the night, Catherine paused at the door, looking back at the city they had helped to transform. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "my father once told me that true legacy isn't measured in dollars and cents, but in the lives we touch and the changes we make in the world." Grayson nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He was right about that, at least. "Yes," Catherine agreed, "and I think we're finally building a legacy we can be proud of." As they stepped out into the cool night air, walking side by side towards an uncertain but hopeful future, Catherine felt a sense of peace settle over her. The road ahead would not be easy. There were still battles to be fought, challenges to be overcome. But for the first time in a long time, she felt truly, deeply content. The story of Catherine Humphrey and Grayson Tanner was far from over, but this chapter, a tale of betrayal, redemption, and the power of second chances, had come to a close. And as Long Beach slept, dreaming of the brighter tomorrow they were helping to build, Catherine and Grayson looked to the future with hope, determination, and the unshakable belief that together they could change the world. In the end, it wasn't about the money, the power, or even the legacy. It was about two people who had lost their way, found each other again, and in doing so, discovered a purpose greater than themselves. It was about justice, not in the cold, unforgiving sense, but in the transformative power of doing what's right, no matter the cost. As the lights of Long Beach twinkled in the distance, Catherine and Grayson walked hand in hand into their new future, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, together. 5 years after the tumultuous events that reshaped Long Beach's business landscape, the city bustled with a renewed energy. The Callahan-Tanner Initiative had grown from a local foundation into a global force for corporate responsibility and environmental stewardship. Its influence could be seen in the green technologies adorning the skyline, the thriving community programs, and the shift in business practices across industries. On a warm summer evening, Catherine Humphrey stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the Long Beach Convention Center. The room was filled with business leaders, politicians, and activists from around the world, all gathered for the initiative's annual Global Ethics in Business Summit. 5 years ago, Catherine began, her voice strong and clear, we stood at a crossroads. The old way of doing business, prioritizing profit above all else, had brought us to the brink of environmental and social disaster. We had a choice to make: continue down that path of destruction or forge a new way forward. As she spoke, her eyes scanned the crowd, landing on familiar faces. Grayson sat in the front row, a proud smile on his face. Beside him was Lily Chen, now the initiative's chief of operations. Even James Woodward was there, the lawyer who had set this all in motion with the reading of Sebastian Callahan's will. We chose to take the harder path, Catherine continued, to challenge the status quo, to demand more from ourselves and our peers. It hasn't been easy. We've faced resistance, skepticism, and at times outright hostility. But look at what we've accomplished. She gestured to the screens behind her, which displayed images of the initiative's projects around the world: sustainable fishing practices in Southeast Asia, renewable energy farms in Africa, urban renewal projects in South America. This isn't just about Long Beach anymore. It's about showing the world that ethical business isn't just possible, it's profitable. That we can create wealth without destroying our planet or exploiting our fellow human beings. As Catherine concluded her speech to thunderous applause, she felt a sense of pride and accomplishment wash over her. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every struggle, every setback. Later that evening, as the summit's attendees mingled over cocktails, Catherine found a quiet moment with Grayson on the convention center's balcony. The Long Beach harbor stretched out before them, the water glittering under the moonlight. "Quite a night," Grayson said, handing her a glass of champagne. "You knocked it out of the park with that speech." Catherine smiled, clinking her glass against his. "Thanks. I still get nervous every time, you know. Keeps me humble, I suppose." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping their champagne and enjoying the cool breeze off the water. So much had changed between them over the years. The anger and resentment of their divorce had faded, replaced by a deep respect and affection. They weren't the same people who had fallen in love all those years ago, but in many ways, their bond was stronger now than it had ever been. "Have you heard from Victoria?" Catherine asked softly, breaking the silence. Grayson nodded, his expression thoughtful. "She's in Singapore now, doing well, from what I understand. She's even started her own ethical fashion line." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "Really? That's unexpected." "People can surprise you," Grayson said with a wry smile. "I think in her own way she's trying to make amends." As they turned back to the party, Catherine caught sight of a young woman across the room, barely more than a girl, really, who was engaged in an animated conversation with a group of tech entrepreneurs. She nudged Grayson, nodding in the girl's direction. "Isn't that Zoe Chen, Lily's niece?" Grayson squinted, then nodded. "I think you're right. Lily mentioned she was interning with us this summer. Bright kid, from what I hear." Catherine watched the young woman for a moment, struck by her enthusiasm and the way the older business leaders seemed to be hanging on her every word. "She reminds me of us, back when we were starting out. All that passion, that belief that we could change the world." Grayson chuckled. "Well, we did change the world, just not quite in the way we originally planned." As they made their way back into the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries with summit attendees, Catherine found her mind drifting to the future. The Callahan-Tanner initiative had accomplished so much, but there was still work to be done. New challenges to face, new battles to fight. She thought of Sebastian Callahan, of the complex legacy he had left her. There were still days when she grappled with the morality of his actions, with the way he had manipulated her and Grayson. But she couldn't deny that his final act had set in motion a chain of events that had led to real positive change. As the evening wound down, Catherine found herself back on the balcony, this time alone. She looked out over the city, her city, marveling at how much had changed, and yet how much remained the same. The lessons of the past 5 years ran through her mind, the importance of integrity, even when it comes at a personal cost, the power of second chances and redemption. The knowledge that true change often requires shaking the very foundations of the systems we've built. But perhaps the most important lesson, she reflected, was that no one can change the world alone. It takes partnership, collaboration, a willingness to listen and learn from others, even those we once considered enemies. As she turned to leave, Catherine's eye caught on a small plaque mounted on the balcony wall. It was a quote, added recently as part of the convention center's renovation. "The true measure of a person's success is not in the wealth they accumulate, but in the positive impact they leave on the world and the lives they touch along the way." The words were attributed to Sebastian Callahan. Catherine smiled, running her fingers over the engraved letters. Her father's final lesson, perhaps the most important of all. As she rejoined the party, ready to face whatever new challenges the future might bring, Catherine felt a sense of peace settle over her. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was still unwritten, and with every decision, every action, she and Grayson and all those who had joined their cause were writing a new story, one of ethical business, environmental stewardship, and the enduring power of redemption. The Callahan-Tanner initiative was more than just a foundation now. It was a movement, a catalyst for change in a world desperately in need of new solutions. And as Catherine looked around the room at the faces of those committed to carrying this vision forward, she knew that their work was far from over. In the end, it wasn't about the money or the power. It was about leaving the world a little better than they found it. And in that, Catherine knew, they had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams. As the night drew to a close and the last of the guests departed, Catherine and Grayson stood at the entrance of the convention center, bidding farewell to the attendees. The cool night air carried the salt scent of the nearby ocean, a reminder of the delicate balance between progress and preservation that was at the heart of their mission. "Ready for another 5 years?" Grayson asked, a hint of their old competitive spirit in his voice. Catherine laughed, linking her arm through his. "Make it 10, we're just getting started." As they walked toward their waiting car, the lights of Long Beach twinkling around them like stars fallen to earth, Catherine felt a surge of excitement for the challenges that lay ahead. The story of the Callahan-Tanner initiative was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. And whatever the future held, she knew they would face it together. Partners in business, in purpose, and in the never-ending quest to make the world a little bit better, one decision at a time. If this story touched you in any way and sparked your curiosity for emotionally charged and inspiring tales, don't stop here. Subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and stay tuned for new stories that might change the way you see life. Each video is an invitation to explore narratives that resonate with the heart. Speaking of which, how about clicking on the next video? I'm sure it will move you too. See you there.